Hey
Tell
guys,
me,
picture
what
this.
news do you
In the
bring
shadow
from
of
the
ancient
village?
temples where
And
people
why
believed
does
gods
concern
demanded
line your
service,
faces,
young
my
girls were
friends?
dedicated to holy marriages. But instead of living a divine life, many spent their days entertaining worshippers, caught between priests and kings. It's the ultimate holy hustle, where spirituality meets survival in the most twisted way possible. But was it empowerment or just elegantly packaged exploitation? Stick around, because we're about to peel back the layers of this forgotten nightmare. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Ancient India, a land of glittering palaces, enlightened sages spouting wisdom under banyan trees, and epics where heroes slay demons while gods play cosmic chess. But let's not romanticize it too much, folks. Beneath the veneer of Vedic chants and Kama Sutra elegance lurked a world where survival often meant trading your body for a scrap of security. Today, we're unearthing the forgotten lives of prostitutes in this so-called golden age. Not the sanitized versions from history books, mind you, but the raw, absurd, and painfully ironic reality. Picture this. Women who were both revered as city jewels and discarded like yesterday's offerings. Women who danced on the knife's edge between artistry and agony. And oh, the sarcasm drips from the pages of ancient texts themselves. Kings regulating brothels like they're managing a spice trade, all while preaching Dharma. If that doesn't scream historical hypocrisy, I don't know what does. Let's start at the beginning, shall we? Way back in the Vedic period, around 1500 BCE, when the Rig Veda was being composed by fire-worshipping poets high on soma juice. Prostitution? Oh, it's there, lurking in the hymns like an uninvited guest at a yajna. Terms like sadharani for a common woman, or hints at harlots and sons of maidens. Euphemisms for the offspring of unmarried women who, let's face it, weren't exactly living off alms. These early references paint a picture of a society where sex work was as old as the hills of the Himalayas. But here's the absurdity. In a world obsessed with purity and caste, these women weren't outright shunned. No, they were tolerated, even integrated into the social fabric because, well, human urges don't care about Brahminical rules. Imagine a Vedic rishi composing verses about cosmic order while sneaking off to a roadside encampment. The irony? The same texts that exalt the divine feminine as Shakti also casually acknowledge women selling their bodies to survive famines, wars, or just the brutal grind of agrarian life. Fast forward a bit to the Mauryan Empire, around 300 BCE, under the iron-fisted rule of Chandragupta Maurya and his cunning advisor, Chanakya, better known as Kautilya, the Machiavelli of the East. This is where things get bureaucratically hilarious. In his Arthashastra, that ultimate guide to statecraft and espionage, Kautilya doesn't just mention prostitutes. He dedicates entire sections to regulating them like they're a branch of the royal treasury. Enter the Ganika, the elite courtesan, the creme de la creme of the sex trade. Not your average streetwalker, oh no. These women were state-sponsored superstars, trained in the 64 arts of the Kama Sutra. Singing, dancing, poetry, painting, even things like making perfumes or solving riddles. Why? Because in ancient India, pleasure wasn't just a sin, it was a science, a strategic asset. Picture a young girl, maybe orphaned or sold by desperate parents during a drought, because survival in those days meant dodging monsoons that flooded your fields or invasions that burned your village. She's spotted by the Ganikadhyaksha, the superintendent of prostitutes. A government official, mind you, paid a hefty 1,000 panas salary, which was more than some ministers got. This guy's job? To scout talent, train them, and deploy them like secret weapons. Absurd, right? The state investing in brothels as if they're building irrigation canals. The Ganika would undergo rigorous education, learning to play the veena with fingers that could make a king weep, reciting verses from the Ramayana while batting eyelashes that hid daggers of wit. And the payoff? These women could charge exorbitant fees, 1,000 karshapanas for a night, enough to buy a herd of elephants. But here's the pain beneath the glamour: refusal to serve a client. Whipped or fined, got old or sick. Cast aside, because beauty was a commodity with an expiration date. Let's zoom in on a day in the life of a Ganika named Lakshmi. Yeah, ironic name, goddess of wealth. But her wealth was built on borrowed time. Dawn breaks over Pataliputra, the bustling capital where the Ganges laps at mud brick walls. Lakshmi wakes in her opulent quarters, silk cushions, gold lamps flickering like false promises. She's not in some dingy alley. No, Ganakas lived in designated districts, Ganakavithaka, guarded like royal treasuries. But security, that's a joke. Her protector is the state, which taxes half her earnings. Because nothing says empowerment like Uncle Sam taking a cut from your bedroom exploits. She starts her day with ablutions, bathing in scented waters infused with sandalwood and jasmine, because smelling divine was part of the job description. Then, training. Hours perfecting the Nritya, those intricate dances that told stories of love and betrayal, her body twisting in ways that masked the bruises from last night's demanding patron. Lunch, exotic fruits and spiced rice, courtesy of admirers who sent gifts hoping for favors. But eating alone, she remembers her initiation, dedicated as a teen, perhaps after her family couldn't afford a dowry. The absurdity, society shunning widows but celebrating these ornaments of the city, as Buddhist texts called them. Jain stories even hail Ganikas as Nagar Sobani, city beautifiers, like living statues enhancing urban prestige. Afternoon brings clients, merchants flush with silk road profits, princes seeking escape from palace intrigues, even spies using her bed as a confessional. Kautilya himself advised using Ganakas for intelligence gathering, whisper sweet nothings, extract state secrets. Lakshmi plays the game, her sarcasm veiled in flirtation. "O mighty warrior, tell me of your conquests," while noting troop movements for her handler. But the pain, the constant threat of disease. Syphilis wasn't named yet, but it ravaged bodies in silence. Or pregnancy, a career killer in a world without contraception beyond herbal guesses. And violence. A drunk nobleman could beat her. And justice? Forget it. She was property, not person. Yet there's a twisted empowerment here. Ganakas accumulated wealth, donating to temples, building gardens, earning respect that eluded housewives bound by pativrata vows. In Sanskrit plays like Sudraka's Marichchakatika, we meet Vasantasena, a Ganaka who falls for a poor Brahmin, using her wits and wealth to navigate society's hypocrisy. She's no victim, she's a boss, turning the tables on lecherous judges. But irony alert, these stories were written by men, romanticizing the very system that trapped women. What do you think? Glamour or cage? Drop a comment if you've ever felt society's double standards in your own life. As evening falls, Lakshmi prepares for the Sabha, the royal assembly. Draped in fine muslin that clings like a second skin, adorned with pearls from the southern seas, she enters the court. King Ashoka, post-Kalinga War, all pious and Buddhist now, might summon her to fan him with a shamara, that peacock feather whisk, while he debates philosophy. Absurd, the conqueror who renounced violence, yet his empire ran on the backs and bodies of women like her. She performs, a dance invoking Parvati's grace, her hips swaying to the tabla's rhythm, eyes locking with admirers who bid like it's an auction. Winner gets her company, loser, perhaps a poisoned drink if politics demand it. But beneath the applause, the pain simmers. Flashbacks to her training, forced lessons in seduction, the first client a leering official. Survival meant dissociation, turning your soul into a fortress while your body performed. And the historical absurdity peaks. In the Artha Shastra, rules for everything, fines for ugly Ganakas scaring clients, bonuses for virgins auctioned off. Virginity as a state asset. Talk about commodifying innocence. Yet, these women sometimes rose high. Amrapali, the legendary Nagarvadu of Vaishali, so beautiful she was shared among nobles, later becoming a Buddhist nun under the Buddha himself. From jewel of the Republic to enlightened ascetic, ironic redemption, or just escaping the nightmare? Let's pause on Amrapali's tale, because it's a microcosm of this madness. Born from a mango, yeah, legend says she emerged from an amra tree, hence the name. She was raised as the Republic's pride, but pride meant being the most desirable courtesan, her price set at 50 crores, a fortune that bankrupted suitors. The Lichchavi nobles, in their democratic wisdom, decided no one man could have her. She'd be communal property. Absurd democracy, voting on a woman's body like it's a public well. She entertained kings, amassed wealth. But the pain? Isolation, objectification, the knowledge that love was a luxury for others. Then, meeting the Buddha, she donates her grove, shaves her head, finds peace. But how many Ganakas got that happy ending? Most faded into obscurity, bodies worn out, spirits broken, shifting gears to the Devadasi system, which adds a layer of sacred absurdity. Emerging around the Gupta period, 300 to 600 CE, when Hinduism blossomed with Puranic tales. Devadasis, servants of God, were girls dedicated to temples, married to deities like Shiva or Vishnu in elaborate ceremonies. Sounds holy? Sure, if you ignore the fine print. They danced for the god by day, serviced priests and patrons by night. Temple prostitution, folks, wrapped in sanctity. Origins murky, maybe from Tamil epics like Silapadikaram, where heroine Kannagi's rage burns a city, but Devadasis appear as temple dancers. Imagine a poor family, Dalit perhaps, hit by crop failure. They dedicate their daughter to the temple, age 7 or 9, pre-puberty for that purity vibe. The ceremony, she's dressed as a bride, garlanded, wed to a stone idol. Then, training in Bharatanatyam or Odissi, those graceful dances mimicking divine love. But the irony, moves inspired by Krishna's flirtations with gopis, performed for leering devotees who paid for private audiences. Social status? High initially. Affluent, landowning, auspicious at weddings. No widowhood stigma since their husband was immortal, but pain of survival. Forced celibacy in theory, exploitation in practice. Diseases spread like temple incense. Children born often became Devadasis too, perpetuating the cycle. In regions like Odisha, Maharis were celibate, but in Karnataka or Tamil Nadu, sacred services included sex, earnings funding the temple. Kings patronized them, Chola emperors donating jewels, Vijayanagara rulers building halls for their performances. Absurd. Warfare-funded piety, where conquered gold adorned women who were essentially slaves to the divine. And the sarcasm in texts? Kalidasa's Meghaduta mentions Devadasis longing for lovers, poetic veil over harsh reality. Take Basavi, a typical Devadasi in a medieval temple. Dawn, rituals, bathing the idol, her hands calloused from years of service. Morning, dance practice, body aching from last night's devotion. Afternoon, entertaining pilgrims, smiles masking exhaustion. Evening, the inner sanctum where God's representatives took their due. Survival meant enduring, dreaming of escape. But society? They revered her as auspicious yet whispered prostitute behind veils. Double standard deluxe. And here's where it gets darker. Disabilities or poverty often sealed a girl's fate. Ugly harvest, dedicate the daughter, deformed child, temple fodder. The absurdity of calling it voluntary when economics dictated destiny. Yet some Devadasis wielded power, patronizing arts, influencing politics. In Jain tales, they're wise advisors. In Buddhist Jatakas, generous donors. But the nightmare? British colonial gaze later twisted it further, banning it while creating red light districts. Irony, victors moralizing over the vanquished's barbarism. As we wrap this first leg of our journey, the absurdity of state-sponsored seduction, the pain of sacred servitude. Think about it. Were these women empowered trailblazers or tragic pawns in a patriarchal game? Comment below with your take. Did ancient India glorify or exploit them? And stay tuned for part 2, where we delve into Gupta-era glamour, literary legends like Vasantasena, and the devolution into outright stigma. You won't believe the twists. All right. Buckle up, folks, because we're diving back into the chaotic, glittering, and gut-wrenching world of ancient India's forgotten women, the prostitutes who were both the heartbeat and the outcast of their society. Last time, we peeled back the curtain on the Mauryan era's Ganikas, those state-sponsored superstars of seduction, and the Devadasis, temple dancers serving gods and men with equal parts grace and despair. Now, we're stepping into the Gupta Empire, around 300 to 600 CE, the so-called Golden Age, where art, literature, and irony flourished like lotus flowers in a muddy pond. Get ready for more historical absurdity, survival's sharp sting, and a sarcastic lens on a world that dressed up exploitation as elegance. Drop a comment with your favorite historical contradiction. Let's see who can spot the wildest one. Picture the Gupta Empire, a time when India was the intellectual and cultural envy of the world. Kalidasa's poetry made hearts swoon. Mathematicians like Aryabhata calculated the stars, and temples rose like stone symphonies to Vishnu and Shiva. But beneath this polished surface, the lives of prostitutes were a masterclass in paradox, celebrated in literature, yet chained by society's whims. The Ganika, that elite courtesan from Mauryan days, was still the rock star of the red light district, but now she had competition. A growing cast of courtesans, dancers, and temple girls navigating a world where pleasure was both currency and curse. The Arthashastra's rigid regulations loosened a bit, but don't get too excited. Freedom was still a pipe dream. Instead, the Gupta era added layers of sophistication to the hustle, wrapping it in poetic metaphors and philosophical debates, all while the pain of survival gnawed at the edges. Let's meet Chandra, a Ganika in Ujjain, the cultural hub where poets and princes rubbed elbows. Chandra's no ordinary woman. She's a walking paradox, trained to outwit scholars and charm kings, yet her life hangs by the thread of her youth and beauty. Her mornings start with a ritual bath in a lotus-filled tank, her hair braided with jasmine to mask the scent of last night's wine-soaked client. She spends hours perfecting her kohl-lined eyes because in a world where a glance could earn a gold coin or a lash, presentation was everything. Her education, top tier. She can recite Kalidasa's Shakuntala with a smirk, play the sitar like it's whispering secrets, and debate Nyaya philosophy with Brahmins who'd blush at her double entendres. Absurd, right? A woman more educated than most men, yet owned by the highest bidder. The Gupta court loved its courtesans. Think of them as the Instagram influencers of their day, minus the filters but with way more at stake. Kings like Chandragupta II, dubbed Vikramaditya, hosted lavish sabhas where Ganikas like Chandra performed. Picture her entering the marble hall, draped in translucent silk dyed with saffron, anklets jingling like a warning. Her dance, a Kathak precursor, tells the story of Radha pining for Krishna. Ironic, since her own longing for freedom is a luxury she can't afford. The crowd, nobles, poets, merchants, throws gold at her feet, but half goes to the state because taxation never sleeps. And the pain, a wrong step, a refused patron, and she's fined or worse. Public humiliation in a society that loves its spectacles. Now, let's talk about the literary glow-up. The Gupta period gave us Sanskrit dramas like Sudraka's Marichchakatika, or The Little Clay Card, where Vasanta Sena, our Ganika heroine, steals the show. She's not just a sex worker, she's a savvy entrepreneur, outsmarting corrupt judges and winning the heart of a broke Brahmin, Charudatta. The play paints her as a romantic rebel, using her wealth to defy social norms. But here's the sarcasm dripping through. Written by men, for men, Vasanta Sena's story romanticizes her struggle while glossing over the grim reality. Her body was her business, and love was a risky side hustle. In real life, a Ganika like Chandra might dream of a Charudatta, but marriage? Social suicide. Her clients wanted her available, not exclusive. And yet these plays made audiences cheer for her, as if society wasn't the one locking her in the gilded cage. The absurdity peaks in the economics. Ganikas were big business. Think of them as walking GDP boosters. In cities like Ujjain or Pataliputra, brothels were zoned like modern-day malls, with state oversight ensuring quality control. Kama Sutra's Vatsyayana, writing around this time, doesn't just give tips on lovemaking. He lists Ganika fees like a menu. One night with a top-tier courtesan, 16 panas, enough to buy a month's grain. Lower-tier Vajias, a few coins, but you get what you pay for. Less charm, more risk of a brawl. The state taxed it all, naturally, because nothing says civilized society like profiting off desperation. And the pain? Chandra's ledger shows wealth, jewels, land, even patronage of temples. But it's a mirage. Age 30 hits, wrinkles appear, and she's replaced by a younger model, her savings often seized by greedy officials. But it's not just the elite Ganikas stealing the spotlight. The streets teemed with Vaisyas, common prostitutes who didn't have Chandra's training or protection. These women, often widows or abandoned wives, worked in alleys or makeshift tents, their lives a stark contrast to the perfumed world of the Ganika. No superintendent here, just pimps or madams who took their cut with a heavy hand. The Buddhist Jatakas tell of Vaisyas saving pennies to donate to monks, seeking merit for their next life, because this one was a lost cause. Irony alert. The same society that revered the Buddha's compassion looked the other way when Vaisyas died of disease or violence. Survival meant dodging drunken soldiers, bartering for scraps, and praying the next client wasn't a sadist. Now, let's pivot to the Devadasi system, which gets even murkier in the Gupta glow. Temples were booming. Think Chidambaram or Khajuraho. their walls carved with celestial nymphs that suspiciously resembled the dancers inside. Devadasis were still married to gods, but now their role was codified. Dance for divine rituals, entertain wealthy patrons, keep the temple coffers full. A girl like Malati, dedicated at 10 to a Shiva temple, spends her days learning Bharatanatyam, her nights performing for pilgrims who paid in gold or grain. Sacred? Sure, if you ignore the priests who doubled as clients, or the temple ledgers listing her services alongside donations of ghee. The absurdity. Inscriptions from Chola temples praise Devadasis as jewels of the deity, yet their children, often fathered by said deity's earthly reps, inherited the same fate. Malati's life is a cycle of ritual and exploitation. Dawn. She sweeps the temple courtyard, her bangles clinking as she prays for strength. Midday. Dance practice, her feet blistered from spinning on stone floors. Evening. A private prayer with a visiting noble, her smile a mask over clenched teeth. The pain? Knowing her devotion to Shiva won't save her from syphilis or a miscarriage hushed up by the temple. Yet, she's no passive victim. Some Devadasis, like Malati, learn to play the game, charming donors, securing land grants, even advising kings. Tamil inscriptions show Devadasis owning property, a rare privilege for women. But the irony? Their power came from their bodies, not their souls, and society never let them forget it. The literature of the time, oh, it loves to toy with these women's stories. In Kalidasa's Meghaduta, a yaksha pines for his lover, passing by courtesans whose longing mirrors his own. Poetic, sure, but it masks the grim truth. Their longing was for escape, not romance. Jain texts like the Kalpa Sutra mention prostitutes as wise confidants, while Buddhist tales cast them as fallen souls redeemed by charity. Notice the pattern? Men writing women's stories, projecting their fantasies or moral lessons. Real voices of Ganakas or Vesyas, silent, drowned out by the clink of coins and the drone of hymns. And let's not forget the social tightrope. Prostitutes were auspicious at festivals, invited to weddings, their presence warding off evil. Yet, they were impure in caste terms, barred from touching certain sacred spaces. Absurd double standard. Society needed their bodies, but scorned their existence. In rural areas, Vesyas faced worse. Village gossip branded them witches, blamed for crop failures or disease. Survival meant navigating this hypocrisy, smiling at the same men who spat at them in daylight. Comment below. Have you ever faced a system that demanded your work but denied your worth? The Gupta era also saw the rise of urban culture, with cities like Varanasi buzzing with markets, theaters, and brothels. Prostitution wasn't just tolerated, it was a civic institution. Kings granted land to brothels, ensuring their upkeep like public parks. But the nightmare? These women were pawns in political games. A Ganaka like Chandra might be gifted to a rival king to seal an alliance, her body a diplomatic tool. Refuse, imprisonment, or death. Kama Sutra casually notes courtesans spying for the state, seduce a general, report his plans, maybe slip poison in his wine. James Bond in a sari, but with no happy ending. As we near the end of this chapter, let's linger on the pain. Chandra, Malati, and countless others lived in a world that celebrated their allure while chaining their freedom. Disease was rampant. Herbal remedies like neem or turmeric were no match for infections that ravaged bodies. Pregnancy? A gamble, with abortion methods crude and dangerous. Violence? A client's bad day could mean a broken rib or worse. And yet, these women survived, some thriving, donating to charities, patronizing poets, leaving their mark in stone inscriptions. The absurdity, a society that relied on their labor but refused them dignity. So what's the takeaway? The Gupta era dressed up exploitation in silk and poetry, but the core remained brutal. Women navigating a man's world with wit, grit, and no small amount of sarcasm. Were they artists, victims, or both? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's debate. And stay tuned for part 3, where we explore the medieval shift, how Islamic invasions, regional kingdoms, and colonial gazes twisted this already messy story. Spoiler, it gets uglier. Hold on to your turbans, folks, because we're plunging into the medieval mess of India's history, where prostitutes, those unsung heroines of survival, faced a world of warring kingdoms, religious upheaval, and enough societal hypocrisy to make your head spin. Picture a land where Rajput forts tower over deserts, Chola temples gleam by the sea, and the first waves of Islamic conquest crash against India's shores. The Ganakas and Devadasis we met before, they're still here, but their game's gotten trickier. Think less golden age glamour and more survive the chaos or bust. From palace intrigues to temple scandals, this era's a wild ride of sacred seduction and brutal betrayals. Drop a comment with the most outrageous historical fact you've heard lately. I'm dying to know what shocks you. We're now in the medieval period, roughly 600 to 1200 CE, where India's no longer the unified Gupta dreamland. It's a patchwork of kingdoms, Pallavas in the south, Rashtrakutas in the Deccan, Pratiharas in the north, each with its own flavor of power plays and piety. The Ganaka system, that state-sponsored courtesan gig, is fading, but not gone. Instead, it's evolving into something more fragmented, more regional, and way more precarious. Meanwhile, the Devadasi system is hitting its peak, with temples becoming mini-empires funded by sacred sex and dance. But don't let the incense fool you. This is a world where survival meant dodging swords, plagues, and the ever-judgmental gaze of society. Let's meet Kamala, a Ganaka in the bustling city of Tanjavur, heart of the Chola Empire. Kamala's a descendant of the Gupta-era courtesans, but her world's less structured, more cutthroat. No Mauryan superintendent to train her. She's mentored by a retired Ganaka who's seen it all. Think of her as a sari-clad Gordon Ramsay, barking orders about poise and seduction. Kamala's mornings are a whirlwind. She bathes in a copper tub, her skin scrubbed with turmeric to glow like the Chola bronzes. Her wardrobe? Layers of silk dyed with indigo, heavy with gold zari, because looking like a goddess was half the battle. She's mastered Odissi dance, can sing Tamil poetry that'd make poets weep, and knows just enough politics to charm a Chola general without getting entangled in his coups. Absurd, right? A woman who's a cultural treasure by night, but by day, she's dodging tax collectors who treat her earnings like temple offerings. The Chola court is where Kamala shines, or burns out. King Rajaraja I, the guy behind the massive Brihadiswara temple, loves his spectacles. Picture Kamala at a royal festival, dancing under a canopy of jasmine and torches, her movements mimicking the cosmic dance of Shiva Nataraja. The crowd, ministers, merchants, even a few foreign traders from the Persian Gulf, tosses coins and pearls, but the real prize is influence. A well-placed wink could secure a land grant or a favor from the king. But the irony, Kamala's freedom is a mirage. Refuse a powerful patron, and she risks exile or worse. Chola records mention courtesans flogged for insolence. And the pain? Her body's a canvas of scars hidden under bangles from clients who didn't take no for an answer. Now, let's talk temples, because the Devadasi system is where the medieval period gets its holy hypocrisy on full display. Temples aren't just spiritual hubs. They're economic powerhouses, owning villages, collecting taxes, and employing thousands. Devadasis like Priya, dedicated to a Vishnu temple in Kenchipuram, are the oil in this machine. Priya's story starts grim. Born to a weaver's family, she's gifted to the temple at 8 after a famine wipes out her kin. The ceremony's a farce. Dressed as a bride, she's married to Vishnu's idol, her childhood swapped for a life of service. By day, she learns Bharatanatyam, her anklets echoing in the temple's mandapa. By night, she's entertaining wealthy devotees who see her devotion as a menu item. Sacred prostitution, folks, dressed up as divine duty. Priya's life is a paradox wrapped in a conundrum. She's revered, her dances draw crowds, her presence blesses weddings. Chola inscriptions call her Tevaradial, servant of the god, and she owns land, a rare perk for women. But the pain? She's a commodity, her body leased to the highest bidder. Temple priests, often her patrons, take their cut, both of her earnings and her dignity. Disease is a constant shadow. Venereal infections, untreatable beyond prayers and herbs, claim many Devadasis by 30. Pregnancy? Either a hushed-up abortion or a child doomed to the same fate. And the absurdity. While Priya's dance glorifies Vishnu's love for Lakshmi, her own heart's locked away because love outside the temple's rules is forbidden. The literature of this era loves to romanticize these women, but it's a man's fantasy. Take Bana's Harshacharita, praising the court of Harsha, where courtesans are described as ornaments of the city, their wit sharper than a Kanda sword. Or the Tamil epic Silapadikaram, where Madhavi, a dancer courtesan, navigates love and betrayal with tragic flair. Madhavi's a star, trained in music, dance, and seduction. She's the darling of Kavaripatanam's elite, but the sarcasm drips when you realize her empowerment is a script. She falls for a merchant, only to be abandoned when his family disapproves. Real-life Kamalas and Priyas rarely got such poetic arcs. Their stories ended in obscurity, not epic verse. Comment below. Do you think these literary heroines glorified or erased the real struggles of prostitutes? The economy of sex work in this period is a study in absurd pragmatism. Temples and courts relied on prostitutes' earnings like modern cities rely on taxes. Chola inscriptions detail Devadasis' contributions, gold, land, even funding for temple expansions. Gannikas like Kamala paid taxes too, but unlike their Mauryan predecessors, they faced freelance hustles. No state salary for their madam. Instead, they negotiated with local lords or merchant guilds, who often doubled as pimps. Lower-tier Vesyas, working in market towns or army camps, had it worse. These women, often refugees from wars or caste outcasts, charged a few copper coins, their lives a blur of survival, dodging drunken soldiers, bartering for food, praying for a monsoon that didn't flood their shacks. And war. Oh, it's a constant. The medieval period's a battlefield, with Rajputs clashing with Pratiharas, Cholas fighting Pandyas, and the first Islamic invasions from the northwest. Prostitutes were war's collateral damage, and its secret weapons. Armies on the move meant mobile brothels, Vaishyas trailing camps like campfires. A Gannika like Kamala might be gifted to a rival general to broker peace, her body a diplomatic pawn. Refuse? Good luck surviving the wrath of a warlord. The Delhi Sultanate's early raids, starting around 1000 CE with Mahmud of Ghazni, added new dangers. His invasions looted temples, disrupted trade, and left women like Priya vulnerable to capture or worse. Irony alert. While Mahmud's chroniclers praised his piety, his soldiers frequented the same brothels they later burned. The social tightrope gets tighter. Prostitutes were still auspicious, invited to festivals, their presence warding off evil spirits. But caste rules hardened, and their impurity became a stigma. Brahmanical texts like the Manusmriti sneered at them, calling them fallen women, yet kings and priests kept their beds warm. In villages, Vaisyas faced mob justice, blamed for droughts or plagues, sometimes lynched as scapegoats. Survival meant mastering the art of invisibility. Smile, perform, disappear before the gossip turned deadly. Buddhist and Jain texts offer glimmers of compassion, praising prostitutes who donated to monasteries, but even these stories reek of condescension. Redeem yourself, sinner, by giving us your coins. The Devadasi system, meanwhile, becomes a bloated institution. Temples like Madurai's Meenakshi or Oressa's Jagannath employed hundreds of Devadasis, their dances a tourist draw for pilgrims from China to Persia. But the nightmare? These women were trapped in a cycle of exploitation. A Devadasi's daughter, like Priya's, was often dedicated at birth, her fate sealed before she could walk. Some temples enforced celibacy for show, but others openly profited from sexual services. Inscriptions from Karnataka list Devadasis' earnings alongside temple livestock, cows, goats, women, all assets. Absurd, right? A system that equates a human to a herd animal, all under the guise of devotion. Let's zoom in on a festival in Thanjavur, where Kamala and Priya's worlds collide. It's the annual chariot festival, the streets alive with drums, chants, and sweat-soaked crowds. Kamala performs at the palace, her dance a seductive ode to the Chola dynasty's glory. Priya, at the temple, leads a procession, her Bharatanatyam a prayer to Shiva. Both are stars, yet both are prisoners. Kamala to the court's whims, Priya to the temple's rules. The crowd cheers, but whispers follow. Ganika, Devadasi, same thing. The pain? Knowing their artistry, their intelligence, is reduced to their bodies. The irony? The same men throwing coins will shun them at dawn. As Islamic influence grows, the cultural landscape shifts. Early sultans, like those of the Ghaznavids, bring Persianate traditions. Courtesans called tawaifs start appearing, blending Indian Ganika flair with Central Asian music and poetry. But the transition's brutal. Temples are raided, Devadasis displaced, some forced into harems or street work. Kamala, if she's lucky, might reinvent herself as a tawaif, learning ghazals to survive. Priya? Her temple might stand, but its wealth, and her status, dwindles under new rulers who don't share the same sacred sex economy. The pain of survival deepens. Disease remains a specter. Leprosy, tuberculosis, and unnamed infections stalk brothels and temples alike. Medical texts like the Karaka Samhita offer herbal cures, but they're guesses at best. Violence is ever present. A Ganika's refusal could mean a beating, a Vezia's defiance, a death sentence. Yet these women carve out agency where they can, saving coins, patronizing poets, even influencing politics. A Chola inscription mentions a Devadasi advising a king on irrigation, because why not? If you're running a temple's economy, you might as well fix the canals. As we wrap this third chapter, the absurdity is clear. Medieval India worshipped its prostitutes as cultural icons while binding them in chains of caste, religion, and power. Kamala and Priya are survivors, navigating a world that demands their beauty but denies their humanity. Were they empowered or enslaved? Drop your take in the comments. Let's stir the pot. And stick around for part 4, where we hit the Mughal era and colonial fallout, watching this ancient system crumble under new moralities and old greed. It's a wild finale you won't want to miss. Here we are, folks, at the grand finale of our sordid saga through ancient India's underbelly, where prostitutes danced, schemed, and survived in a world that both worshipped and spat on them. Picture the Mughal Empire in its pomp, minarets piercing the sky, poets spinning ghazals in Agra's courts, and tawaifs, the new queens of seduction, stealing hearts and secrets. But as the British roll in with their starched collars and sanctimonious sneers, the game changes. From Mughal opulence to colonial crackdowns, the lives of these women spiral into a whirlwind of reinvention, stigma, and defiance. Buckle up for a tale of fading glory, brutal moralizing, and survival's sharp bite. Drop a comment with what you think the worst era for these women was. I'm curious to hear your take. We're now in the Mughal era, starting around 1526 CE with Babur's conquest, stretching to the 19th century when the British tightened their grip. The Ganika of old is a distant memory, her state-sponsored glamour replaced by the Tawaif, a courtesan blending Persian poetry, Indian dance, and a knack for navigating Mughal politics. The Devadasi system, once a temple cornerstone, is fraying under Islamic rule and internal decay. Meanwhile, street-level Vesyas scrape by in bazaars and army camps, their lives a gritty counterpoint to the perfumed world of the elite. This is a time of transition, where old traditions clash with new powers, and prostitutes, as always, are caught in the crossfire. Meet Noor, a Tawaif in Shah Jahan's Delhi, where the Red Fort gleams and the Jama Masjid echoes with prayers. Noor's no ordinary performer. She's a cultural chameleon, trained in Kathak, Persian ghazals, and the art of making nawabs feel like gods. Her mornings are spent in a haveli, a courtyard house with latticed windows, practicing dance moves that blend the fluid grace of Bharatanatyam with the sharp spins of Central Asian styles. Her wardrobe? Brocade lehengas heavy with Zardozi embroidery, her neck dripping with pearls that cost more than a village's harvest. She's a star, performing at mehfils, intimate gatherings where nobles sip sharbat and lose themselves in her voice. But the absurdity? Her brilliance is a leash. A misstep in court politics could land her in a dungeon or worse, a rival Tawaif's smear campaign. The Mughal court is a snake pit of intrigue, and Tawaifs like Noor are its secret weapons. Emperors like Akbar patronized them, not just for pleasure, but for espionage. Noor's trained to listen. When a noble rants about rebellion over wine, she's memorizing names for her patron, maybe a wazir plotting his own game. The Kama Sutra's old spy courtesan playbook is alive and well, but now it's set to the tune of sitars and Persian couplets. Her earnings? Staggering. 100 mohurs for a night, enough to buy a war horse. But the pain? Half her wealth goes to her madam, another chunk to bribe officials who'd otherwise raid her kotha. And the constant threat, a jealous rival, a spurned lover, or a puritanical cleric calling her a blot on Islam's honor. The Devadasi system, meanwhile, is on life support. Temples in the south, think Madurai or Tanjore, still employ Devadasis, but their sacred aura is fading. Mughal rulers, with their Islamic lens, don't vibe with temple prostitution, though they're happy to exploit Tawaifs in their own courts. In Vijayanagara, the last Hindu empire standing, Devadasis like Lakshmi hold on. Lakshmi, dedicated at 12 to a Krishna temple, dances for dwindling crowds, her Bharatanatyam a fading echo of Gupta glory. Her nights, spent with local lords who fund the temple's upkeep. The irony, inscriptions still call her divine, but her life's a grind. Blistered feet, a body racked by untreated infections, and a daughter already marked for the same fate. The pain? Knowing her devotion to Krishna won't save her from a society that sees her as a commodity. The literature of the Mughal era loves its tawaifs, but it's a gilded cage. Urdu poetry, blooming under poets like Ghalib, paints them as tragic muses, women whose love is pure, but doomed. Take the story of Anarkali, possibly apocryphal, a courtesan said to have loved Prince Salim, later Jahangir, only to be walled up alive for her audacity. Romantic? Sure, if you ignore the fact that real tawaifs like Noor rarely got such dramatic ends. They just faded into poverty when their looks did. Persian chronicles mention tawaifs advising emperors, their salons hubs of culture where poets and painters mingled. But the sarcasm drips. These women were celebrated for their minds, yet judged for their bodies. Comment below. Do you think Anarkali's tale is romantic, or just a fancy cover for exploitation? The economy of sex work shifts gears. Tawaifs operate in kothas, urban brothels that double as cultural centers. These aren't the state-run Ganikavithekas of old. They're private enterprises, often run by cunning madams who train girls like Noor from childhood. Lower-tier Vesyas, working in bazaars or near Mughal garrisons, face a bleaker reality. These women, often war widows or displaced peasants, charge a few annas for survival sex, their lives a blur of hunger and violence. Mughal records note taxes on brothels because even emperors need their cut, but no protection. A Vezya's bad night might end with a soldier's blade, no questions asked. The absurdity, a society that taxes pleasure but shrugs at pain. Then come the British, storming in with their East India Company and Victorian prudery. By the 18th century, as Mughal power wanes, colonial influence creeps in, and the tawaif's world starts to crumble. The British see kotas as dens of vice, not culture. Tawaifs like Noor, once courted by Nawabs, are now labeled Noch girls, their kathak reduced to exotic entertainment for Zahibs. The Devadasi system fares worse. Colonial reformers, horrified by temple prostitution, push for bans, ignoring the economic havoc it wreaks. Lakshmi's temple loses patronage as British policies divert funds to plantations. By 1857, the Sepoy Mutiny sparks chaos, and prostitutes, tawaifs, and Vesyas alike become scapegoats. Some tawaifs, like those in Lucknow, fund rebels, their kothas hubs of resistance. The British response? Crackdowns, branding them traitors. Enter the Contagious Diseases Acts of the 1860s, a masterclass in colonial hypocrisy. To protect British soldiers from venereal disease, the Raj regulates brothels, forcing Vesyas into lock hospitals for brutal medical exams. Tawaifs, once elite, are lumped in with street workers, their status erased. The pain? These exams, often invasive and humiliating, do nothing for the women's health. Herbal remedies like neem are replaced by mercury treatments that poison more than they cure. Devadasas face a death knell. British laws and Christian missionaries push to save them, banning temple dedications. But salvation comes with a catch. Displaced Devadasas like Lakshmi often end up in urban slums, trading temple servitude for street survival. The social stigma hardens. Victorian morality, layered over caste prejudices, paints all prostitutes as moral rot. Tawaifs, once poets and spies, are now common whores in British records. Vesyas, already marginalized, face worse. Cantonment brothels spring up near army bases where women are little more than chattel. The irony? The same British officers who sermonize about decency frequent these brothels, their wives sipping tea in bungalows nearby. Indian society, under colonial influence, doubles down on purity. Nationalist reformers like Raja Ram Mohan Roy push to cleanse traditions, but offer no safety net for women like Noor or Lakshmi. Yet, survival persists. Tawaifs adapt, some becoming early Bollywood's first stars, their kathak and ghazals lighting up silent films. Others, like Begum Akhtar, transform into musical legends, their voices carrying the pain of centuries. Devadasis, though banned, leave a legacy. Bharatanatyam is revived by upper-class women like Rukmini Devi, who sanitize its temple roots. The absurdity, a dance born in exploitation, now a symbol of national pride. Vesyas, with no such redemption, fade into red light districts, their stories unwritten. Let's zoom in on Noor's final days. She's 35, her beauty fading, her Haveli sold to pay debts. A British officer offers patronage, but his price, public performances for sneering colonials, is too steep for her pride. she retires to a small village, teaching music to girls who'll never know her glory. Lakshmi, meanwhile, leaves her temple, now a shadow of its Vijayanagara days. She joins a Calcutta brothel, her dance forgotten, her body a means to eat. Both women, once icons, are erased by a world that used them up. As we close this saga, the pain is clear. From Vedic Sadharanas to Mughal Tawaifs, these women were artists, survivors, and scapegoats in a society that demanded their bodies but denied their souls. The absurdity? Their legacy lives in India's music, dance, and even cinema, yet their names are dust. Were they victims, rebels, or both? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's end this debate with a bang. And thanks for joining this wild ride through history's shadows. What other forgotten stories should we unearth next? Tell me below. Hold tight, folks, because we're closing out this wild ride through ancient India's shadows with a final plunge into the Mughal dazzle and colonial gloom. Imagine a world where Tawaifs weave poetry and intrigue in perfumed kothas, only to be branded as moral filth by British prudes. The Devadasas, those temple dancers who once lit up Chola courts, are now ghosts in their own sacred spaces, their art stolen by a society that scorns them. This is the endgame of our saga, a tale of fading elegance, brutal hypocrisy, and women who survived by outsmarting a world stacked against them. Drop a comment with what you think these women's greatest strength was: wit, resilience, or something else. Let's wrap this with a bang. We're in the Mughal era, 1526 to 1857 CE, where India is a tapestry of opulent courts, Persian poetry, and simmering rebellion. The Ganika's long gone, replaced by the Tawaif, a courtesan who's part poet, part spy, part heartbreak in a lehenga. The Devadasi system, once a temple juggernaut, is crumbling under Mughal rule and internal rot. Street Vezias, as always, bear the brunt of society's cruelty, scraping by in bizarre alleys. As the British swagger in with their muskets and missionaries, the rules change, but the game stays rigged. Prostitutes, whether elite or downtrodden, navigate a maze of power, piety, and prejudice, with nothing but their grit and guile. Meet Zara, a Tawaif in Aurangzeb's Delhi, where the air hums with qawwalis and the clink of gold mohurs. Zara's a force, trained in Kathak, her spins like a dervish's trance, her ghazals so soulful they'd make a Mughal prince weep. Her Haveli's a cultural hotspot, carved sandalwood screens, silk cushions, and a tabla player who never misses a beat. Mornings, she's up at dawn practicing Urdu couplets, her voice a velvet blade. Her wardrobe's a fortune, emerald-studded churidar, a veil so fine it's practically air. She performs at mehfils, elite gatherings where nawabs and poets drown in her charm. But the absurdity, her freedom's a mirage. One wrong word to a jealous begum, one refused noble, and she's out, banished or worse, her Haveli torched in a moral raid. Mughal courts thrive on Tawaifs like Zara. Emperors from Babur to Bahadur Shah Zafar use them as soft power, seduce a rival, eavesdrop on a traitor, maybe slip a dagger under the pillow. Zara's a master. When a wazir brags about his Deccan campaign, she's noting troop numbers for a rival lord, all while pouring him rosewater sherbet. Her earnings? 100 mohurs a night, enough to buy a small estate. But the pain? Taxes eat half her wealth, her madam takes another slice, and puritanical clerics brand her a devil's pawn. Aurangzeb, the pious killjoy, bans music and dance, yet his nobles sneak to her kotha. Hypocrisy. Thy name is empire. Down south, the Devadasi system limps on. In Tanjore, under Maratha rule, Devadasas like Saraswati cling to their temples. Saraswati, dedicated at 10 to a Shiva lingam, dances Bharatanatyam for dwindling pilgrims. Her mornings are rituals, lighting lamps, chanting mantras, her body aching from years of spinning on stone floors. Nights, she's serving local zamindars who fund the temple's lamps. The irony? Her dance, a prayer to Shiva's cosmic rhythm, is a front for transactions listed in temple ledgers next to donations of rice. The pain? Her daughter, born of a fleeting affair, is already marked for dedication, a cycle of servitude disguised as sanctity. The literature of the time is obsessed with Tawaifs. Urdu poets like Mir Taki Mir weave them into verses as tragic muses, their love unattainable yet pure. The tale of Umrao Jan, later immortalized in novels and film, captures the vibe. A girl kidnapped, trained as a Tawaif, her heart broken by a world that adores her art but despises her soul. Real Tawaifs like Zara rarely got such poetic endings. Most aged out, their savings snatched by greedy patrons or Kotha debts. Devadasis fare no better. Tamil poetry praises their grace, but inscriptions reveal their reality. Taxed, traded, their children pawns in temple politics. Comment below. Do these romanticized stories honor or erase these women's struggles? The economy of sex work is a tangled web. Tawaifs run kothas like businesses, training girls in music and manners, but they're at the mercy of patrons and politics. Zara's kotha is a cultural hub. Poets recite, painters sketch, merchants haggle over her time, but a bad season, a Mughal crackdown, and she's selling jewels to eat. Vesyas, the street workers, face grimmer odds. Often widows or runaways, they haunt bazaars or army camps, charging a few paisa for a quick encounter in a mud hut. Mughal taxmen skim their earnings, offering no protection from drunk soldiers or cholera outbreaks. The absurdity. An empire that funds mosques with brothel taxes while preaching morality. Then the British crash the party. By the 1700s, the East India Company's creeping in, and by 1857, they're running the show. Their Victorian lens turns Tawaifs into nautch girls, their Kathak a circus act for colonial officers. Zara, once a Nawab's muse, now performs for sneering sahibs who tip in rupees, not respect. The Devadasi system takes a fatal hit. British reformers, clutching their Bibles, see temple dancers as prostitutes, not priestesses. Laws like the Madras Devadasi Act of 1947, foreshadowed in earlier bans, outlaw dedications, but offer no lifeline. Saraswati's temple loses funds as the British redirect taxes to tea estates. She's forced into a Madras brothel, her sacred dance forgotten. The contagious diseases, acts of the 1860s, are colonial hypocrisy at its peak. To curb syphilis among troops, Vesyas are rounded up for inspections. Think invasive exams with no anesthesia, mercury treatments that rot teeth more than cure. Tawaifs like Zara, once elite, are swept into this net, their status erased. The pain, these women, already battling disease and violence, face humiliation under the guise of public health. Meanwhile, British officers frequent the same brothels they regulate, their wives penning letters about India's savagery. Indian society, under colonial sway, doubles down on stigma. Nationalists like Dayananda Saraswati preach purity, but ignore the women left homeless by temple bans. Yet, these women fight back. Tawaifs like Zara pivot to rebellion. During the 1857 mutiny, Lucknow's kothas fund sepoys, their songs coded messages for rebels. The British retaliate, torching kothas, branding Tawaifs traitors. Some, like Begum Hazrat Mahal, blur the line between courtesan and revolutionary, leading armies while draped in silk. Devadasis, though displaced, leave a mark. Bharatanatyam survives, sanitized by elites like Rukmini Devi, who erase its temple roots for respectable stages. The absurdity. A dance born in exploitation becomes India's cultural crown jewel, its origins scrubbed clean. Vesyas, with no such legacy, sink deeper. Cantonment brothels near British barracks trap women in cycles of debt and disease. A Vesya's life, maybe a girl like Radha, orphaned by famine, is a blur of survival. A straw mat, a flickering lamp, and clients who pay in blows as often as coins. Medical texts mention venereal sores, but treatments are quackery, turmeric pastes or arsenic pills. The pain, knowing society sees you as a problem, not a person. Yet, Radha might slip a coin to a street singer, hoping for karma in a next life that feels less like a curse. Let's linger on Zara and Saraswati. Zara, now 40, her voice cracking, sells her last anklet to fund a music school in a dusty village. Her students will never know she once made Nawabs kneel. Saraswati, cast out of her temple, joins a Bombay red light district, her Bharatanatyam a memory as she barters for rice. Both women, once stars, are erased by a world that consumed them. Their legacy? Tawaifs shape early Bollywood. Singers like Gauhar John record India's first gramophone tracks, their voices echoing pain and pride. Devadasis gift the world classical dance, though its sacred roots are buried. As we end this journey, the irony stings. From Vedic Sadharanas to colonial outcasts, these women were artists, spies, survivors. Yet history forgot their names. Their songs, dances, and defiance live on in India's culture. But their suffering, swept under the rug of progress, were they pawns or pioneers? Drop your verdict in the comments. Let's spark a debate. And as we leave these shadows, tell me, what other buried history should we dig up next? Your call, folks. Swept under the rug of progress. Were they pawns or pioneers? Drop your verdict in the comments. Let's spark a debate. And as we leave these shadows, tell me, what other buried history should we dig up next? Your call, folks. Imagine this. A German princess thrust into the frozen hell of 18th century Russia, clawing her way to the throne over a sea of scheming nobles, inept husbands, and enough vodka-soaked betrayals to fill the Neva River. But forget the glory. Today, we're diving into the top 5 revolting habits of Catherine the Great, the empress who turned enlightenment into a blood-soaked farce. Buckle up, because if you think modern life is tough, wait till you hear about surviving her court. Which habit do you think is the grossest? Drop it in the comments below. I'll shout out the wildest ones in part 2. Oh, the grandeur of it all. Picture St. Petersburg in the dead of winter, where the wind howls like a Cossack with indigestion, and the palaces gleam with gold leaf while peasants freeze in their thatched hovels. Catherine, born Sophie Friederike August von Anhalt-Zerbst-Dornburg, try saying that after a few shots of kvass, arrived in Russia at 14, wide-eyed and utterly unprepared for the barbaric splendor awaiting her. Her future husband, Peter III, was a man-child obsessed with toy soldiers and Prussian uniforms, more interested in drilling his guards than, well, anything else. But Catherine, she adapted like a wolf in sheep's clothing, learning Russian, converting to Orthodoxy, and plotting her ascent with the precision of a chess master who cheats. But let's not romanticize this. Survival in the past was a nightmare of lice-infested wigs, chamber pots dumped into streets, and diseases that could turn your guts to soup overnight. Catherine's world was one where Enlightenment ideas clashed with medieval brutality. Philosophers like Voltaire penned flattering letters while serfs were traded like cattle. And amid this chaos, our empress developed habits that would make your stomach churn. We're talking revolting, absurd, and downright painful to imagine. Why? Because power corrupts, and absolute power. It turns you into a walking historical horror show. Starting with number 5, her insatiable appetite for lovers, treated like disposable playthings in a game of royal roulette. Ah, the lovers. Catherine didn't just have affairs, she collected them like stamps, each one stamped out when they outlived their usefulness. Grigory Orlov, the dashing cavalry officer who helped orchestrate the coup against her husband. Remember that? Peter III, the bumbling fool who preferred rats to ruling, was deposed in 1762 after just 6 months on the throne. Orlov and his brothers stormed the palace, and Peter ended up accidentally dead from a mysterious case of hemorrhoidal colic. Official story? Sure, if you believe fairy tales written by executioners. But back to the habit. Catherine's bed was a revolving door of ambition and anatomy. After Orlov, there was Stanisław Poniatowski, whom she installed as King of Poland just to keep him busy while she annexed his country piece by piece. Then Grigory Potemkin, the one-eyed giant who built fake villages to impress her, talk about historical gaslighting. He'd line the roads with painted facades and happy actors posing as peasants, all while the real ones starved in the background. Catherine would tour, not approvingly, and reward him with estates the size of small countries. Now, imagine the pain of it all. These weren't passionate romances. They were survival strategies in a court where one wrong whisper could land you in Siberia. Lovers weren't just for fun. They were political pawns, bodyguards, and spies. But the revolting part? The sheer disposability. When Orlov grew too jealous, she shipped him off with a pension and a pat on the head. Potemkin? He transitioned from lover to ex-lover manager, handpicking her next conquests like a deranged HR department. And the young ones, like Platon Zubov, barely out of their teens, fawning over a woman in her 60s. The age gaps alone scream historical absurdity. Think about the physical toll. In an era without antibiotics, every tryst was a roll of the dice with venereal diseases lurking like uninvited guests. Syphilis ravaged Europe, turning noses to mush and minds to madness. Catherine dodged the bullet, apparently. But her lovers, not always so lucky, and the court gossip, whispers in gilded halls about her favorites, with engravings and pamphlets spreading lurid tales across Europe. Voltaire defended her, calling the rumors bourgeois envy, but come on. The woman had a testing chamber for potential lovers, run by her lady-in-waiting. Candidates were inspected for suitability, then sent back if they failed the audition. Revolting? Absolutely. Imagine the humiliation, the objectification, all wrapped in silk and sarcasm. But why was this habit so ingrained? Survival, darling. In Russia, an empress without heirs or allies was as good as dead. Catherine's son Paul hated her, suspecting she offed his dad, and he wasn't wrong. So she surrounded herself with loyal studs, rewarding them with titles and lands. It was a system of patronage via pillow talk, absurd in its efficiency. One lover, Sergei Saltykov, might have even fathered Paul, making the whole dynasty a bedroom farce. And the pain? For the women at court, it was a constant reminder of their expendability. Mistresses were elevated, then discarded. Wives like Peter's first were exiled to nunneries. Let's pause and engage. If you were in Catherine's court, would you risk being a favorite or play it safe as a scheming noble? Comment your survival strategy. I bet some of you would outplot her. Moving deeper into the absurdity, consider the daily grind. Waking up in a palace where the air reeks of unwashed bodies and incense because bathing was considered dangerous. Yes, really? Doctors warned that hot water opened pores to evil humors. So Catherine, enlightened as she was, probably stank like everyone else, masking it with perfumes that could knock out a bear. But her habit extended beyond lovers to a revolting obsession with control, micromanaging everything from military campaigns to menus. Yet, in this top 5, number 5 pales compared to what's coming. But let's elaborate on the lovers a bit more, because the stories. Take Alexander Lanskoy, a young guard she plucked from obscurity in 1779. He was 22. She was 50. For 5 years, he was her constant companion, reading philosophy to her, sharing her bed, until he died suddenly, poisoned, some say, by jealous rivals. Catherine mourned dramatically, building him a mausoleum. But within months, new favorite installed, the turnover rate was brutal, like a reality show where losers get exiled instead of roses. And the historical absurdity peaks with the rumors. Europe buzzed with tales of her death, crushed by a horse during a bizarre encounter, total fabrication by her enemies, but it stuck because her habits invited scandal. In truth, she suffered a stroke while on the commode, a fittingly undignified end for someone who lived so larger than life. But imagine the pain of reputation. A woman who reformed laws, expanded the empire, corresponded with Diderot, reduced to tabloid fodder. Now, transitioning to number 4, her grotesque indulgence in opulent feasts while Russia starved, a habit of gluttony that turned banquets into battlegrounds of excess. Picture this: tables groaning under mountains of caviar, roasted swans, and pies stuffed with live birds that fluttered out when cut. Yes, that was a thing. Catherine's court dinners were marathons, lasting hours, with courses numbering in the dozens. She'd sip imported wines from France while serfs outside gnawed on black bread infested with weevils. The absurdity? While she promoted agricultural reforms, her own habits epitomized waste. One feast for Potemkin's name day featured a mechanical elephant that dispensed punch from its trunk, engineered at enormous cost while famine raged in the provinces. And the pain of survival? For the cooks, it was hell. Toiling in sweltering kitchens, risking burns and beatings if the blini weren't fluffy enough. Peasants delivered tribute in the form of exotic foods, trekking miles through snow, only to watch nobles vomit from overindulgence. Catherine herself wasn't a glutton per se, but she enabled it, using food as a weapon of diplomacy. Foreign ambassadors were force-fed until they burst, literally negotiating treaties over tureens of borscht. And the revolting hygiene? No forks for many, fingers dipped into communal bowls, spreading God knows what. In an age of cholera and typhus, every meal was a gamble. But let's dive deeper. During the Pugachev Rebellion in 1773 to 1775, when Cossacks and peasants rose up against serfdom, claiming the true Tsar was leading them, Catherine feasted in safety while her armies crucified rebels. Pugachev, the impostor pretending to be Peter III, was drawn and quartered in Moscow's Red Square, his limbs hacked off while alive, head displayed on a pike. All while Catherine hosted balls, her habit of detachment turning horror into high society. Imagine the sarcasm of it. Oh, the peasants are revolting? Pass the piroshki? Her correspondence reveals a woman aware of the suffering but prioritizing empire. She emancipated no serfs, despite Enlightenment ideals, because habits die hard, and hers was clinging to power through excess. Engage time. What's the most over-the-top historical feast you've heard of? Share in the comments, and let's see if it tops Catherine's elephant punch. As we build this nightmare, remember the cold. Winters where fingers blackened from frostbite, and survival meant huddling by fires fueled with dung. Catherine's habit extended to ignoring this, focusing on expansion. She conquered Crimea in 1783, adding sunny shores to her realm, but at what cost? Thousands died in wars, bodies piling up like snowdrifts. Now, fleshing out number 4 more. The feasts weren't just food, they were performances of power. She'd dress in masculine riding habits, shocking Europeans, and hunt bears while her guests gorged. One story has her shooting a wolf from horseback, then serving its pelt as a tablecloth. Absurd, utterly revolting, the bloodstains alone, and the pain for attendees, forced to eat until ill or risk offending the empress. Hangovers from her potent punches left courtiers bedridden while she rose early for work. Her routine, up at 5 a.m., black coffee, then dictating laws. But evenings, debauchery disguised as dinner, transitioning toward number 3. But first, let's linger on the absurdity of her enlightened rule. She convened a legislative commission in 1767, inviting delegates from all classes, except serfs of course, to debate reforms. It dissolved without change, a farce of participation. Habits like this highlighted the cauchemar, promising progress while delivering pain. Number 4's gluttony fed into her next revolting habit, a penchant for bizarre medical experiments and quackery that turned her body into a battlefield of leeches and laxatives. Yes, number 3. Her obsessive, grotesque health regimens in an era when medicine was basically torture. Doctors back then? Charlatans with degrees in bloodletting. Catherine, ever the hypochondriac, subjected herself to purges, enemas, and bleedings that left her weak as a kitten. One habit, daily ice baths in the Neva, believing cold water warded off aging. Ignore the pneumonia risk. She'd emerge shivering, wrapped in furs, then down herbal concoctions laced with mercury, which rotted teeth and poisoned slowly. The absurdity peaks with her inoculation against smallpox in 1768. She had herself variolated, pus from a victim's sore rubbed into her arm before it was common, then did the same to her son. Brave? Sure. Revolting? The pus part alone makes you gag. And it worked, but many died from the procedure. Her court followed suit, turning palaces into pox parties. But the pain, imagine the side effects. Fever, blisters, scars. Catherine bore a mark on her arm, a badge of survival in a world where smallpox claimed 1 in 3. Her habit extended to collecting medical oddities. Cabinets of curiosities with preserved fetuses and deformed skeletons, displayed like trophies. Engage? Would you try 18th century medicine? Comment yes or no, and why not? Deeper in, she consulted quacks like Dr. Rogerson, who prescribed opium for everything. Addiction loomed, but she moderated, unlike courtiers hooked on laudanum, wandering halls like ghosts. And the historical sarcasm, enlightened ruler, yet clinging to superstitions. She banned coffee at one point, fearing it stirred rebellion, then reversed when her headaches worsened. As we approach 2,000 words, let's wrap this part with a teaser. Number 3's quackery sets up even darker habits, like her manipulation of history itself. But that's for part 2. The cauchemar continues. Survival meant enduring abscesses lanced without anesthesia, teeth pulled with pliers. Catherine lost most of hers, relying on false ones carved from walrus ivory, yellowing, ill-fitting, causing constant discomfort. One anecdote, during a toothache, she had a servant's tooth yanked to test the pain. Revolting empathy. The poor soul screamed. She proceeded anyway. Now, building tension. These habits weren't isolated. They wove into a tapestry of terror. Lovers fed at feasts, then bled for health. Absurd, painful, sarcastic history. Part 1 ends here, but stay tuned. Part 2 dives into numbers 2 and 1, with more gore and giggles. What do you think number 1 is? Comment your guess. All right, you thought part 1 was a wild ride? Brace yourself, because we're diving back into the revolting habits of Catherine the Great, where the Russian court's gilded facade hides a cesspool of absurdity and agony. If you missed the first part, we covered her lover-dumping addiction and gluttonous feasts that could bankrupt a nation. Oh, and don't forget to drop in the comments which of her habits you think is the most stomach-churning so far. Part 2's about to crank the gross factor to 11, so let's get to it. Guess what number 1 is while you're at it? I'm reading those comments. We left off with Catherine's bizarre medical experiments, her third most revolting habit, where she turned her body into a guinea pig for 18th century quacks. Ice baths, mercury tonics, and smallpox pus rubbed into her arm. Enlightened empress, my foot. But let's climb higher on this grotesque ladder to number 2. Her obsession with rewriting history through propaganda so shameless it'd make a modern spin doctor blush. This wasn't just tweaking the narrative, it was a full-on assault on truth, wrapped in velvet and served with a smirk. Picture the scene. St. Petersburg, 1770s, where the air smells of wax candles, unwashed courtiers, and the faint tang of fear. Catherine's been on the throne for a decade, her coup against Peter III a fading memory, except for the pesky rumors that she orchestrated his hemorrhoidal colic demise. The Russian court was a snake pit of gossip, where nobles plotted over pelmeni and serfs whispered about rebellion. To survive, Catherine didn't just rule. She sculpted her image like a sculptor chiseling marble, except her tools were lies, bribes, and a knack for making enemies disappear into Siberia's frosty embrace. This habit was revolting because it wasn't just about vanity. It was about erasing reality. Take the Pugachev Rebellion, that messy uprising from 1773 to 1775. A Cossack named Yemelyan Pugachev, claiming to be the miraculously not dead Peter III, rallied thousands of serfs, Cossacks, and outcasts, promising to end serfdom. Villages burned, nobles were hacked apart, and panic spread faster than fleas in a barracks. Catherine's response? Crush it with an iron fist. 40,000 troops, mass executions, entire towns razed. Pugachev was captured, dragged to Moscow in a cage like a circus animal, then drawn and quartered. His head was spiked on a pole, his limbs scattered to the winds. Charming, right? But here's where it gets absurd. Catherine didn't just kill Pugachev, she tried to erase him. Official decrees banned his name, villages he'd visited were renamed, and records of the rebellion were burned or buried in archives. She ordered historians to rewrite the narrative, claiming it was a minor skirmish, not a near collapse of her empire. Propaganda paintings showed her as Minerva, goddess of wisdom, while pamphlets described Pugachev as a drunken lunatic, not a charismatic leader. The pain? For the serfs, it was a gut punch. Your rebellion, your suffering, you're dead, erased. Imagine surviving a massacre only to be told it never happened. The sarcasm drips here. Catherine, the enlightened pen pal of Voltaire, champion of reason, was gaslighting an entire nation. She'd write lofty treatises on liberty while her soldiers impaled rebels on stakes. Her nakaz, a 1767 legal code meant to modernize Russia, was a masterpiece of hypocrisy, promising justice while serfs were whipped for looking at a noble funny. And the absurdity? She'd host lavish balls during the rebellion, dancing the minuet while her armies turned the Volga red. Let's dig into the mechanics of this habit. Catherine employed a small army of scribes, artists, and spies to craft her myth. Her court painter, Vladimir Borovikovsky, churned out portraits showing her as a serene matriarch. Never mind the blood on her hands. She funded newspapers to print glowing reviews of her reign, while censors slashed anything hinting at dissent. Foreign ambassadors were wined and dined until they parroted her version of events back to Europe. And the pain of survival? For the writers and artists, it was a tightrope. Praise the Empress or face exile. One poet, caught mocking her in a tavern, was flogged and sent to Kamchatka. His crime? A limerick about her lovers. Engage time. If you were a court scribe, would you risk sneaking truth into your work or play it safe with flattery? Drop your choice in the comments. Let's see who's brave. But the revolting part isn't just the lies, it's the scale. Catherine didn't stop at Russia. She manipulated European opinion, sending diplomats to Versailles and Vienna with tales of her benevolence. When she annexed Crimea in 1783, a move that sparked wars and displaced thousands, she spun it as civilizing the Tatars. Fake villages, thanks Potemkin, lined her tours with smiling actors posing as happy subjects. Meanwhile, real Crimeans were taxed into oblivion or shipped off to fight her wars. The absurdity peaks when you realize she believed her own hype, writing in her memoirs that she saved Russia from chaos. Sure, if saving means crushing dissent with a smile, and the pain extended to her own family. Her son Paul, the heir, was a walking reminder of her shaky legitimacy. Rumors swirled that his father wasn't Peter III, but one of her lovers, maybe Saltykov. So she sidelined him, rewriting history to paint herself as Russia's sole savior. Paul grew up in a gilded cage, paranoid and resentful, while Catherine's propaganda machine churned out tales of her maternal devotion. The koshmar of it. A mother erasing her son's place in history to secure her own. Let's zoom in on a story. In 1787, Catherine embarked on her famous Crimean tour, a propaganda stunt to show off her new territories. Potemkin orchestrated the whole farce. Villages built overnight, peasants bussed in to cheer, even fake ships painted on the horizon to impress foreign guests. The cost? Millions of rubles, enough to feed entire provinces for years. While Catherine marveled at her prosperous empire, real peasants starved, their grain requisitioned to stock her banquets. One ambassador, too drunk on her hospitality, wrote home that Russia was paradise. The sarcasm, paradise with a body count. But this habit wasn't just about spectacle, it was survival. In a court where loyalty was bought with land and titles, Catherine's propaganda kept nobles in line. Displease her, and you weren't just exiled, you were erased from the narrative. One general, caught skimming funds, was publicly humiliated, his name stricken from military records. His family, shunned, their estates confiscated. The pain of being unpersoned in a society obsessed with status was worse than death. Now, let's transition to number 1, the pièce de résistance of Catherine's revolting habits, her gruesome complicity in serfdom's horrors, a system so brutal it makes her other quirks look quaint. If you thought propaganda was bad, wait till you hear about the human cost of her empire. Serfdom in Russia wasn't just slavery with extra steps, it was a nightmare of dehumanization. By Catherine's reign, over half the population, millions, were serfs, bound to the land, bought and sold like livestock. They toiled from dawn to dusk, whipped for slacking, and taxed until they starved. Catherine, the enlightened reformer, didn't just tolerate this. She leaned into it, tightening the screws to fund her wars and feasts. Her habit? Turning a blind eye to atrocities while profiting from them, all with a philosopher's smile. The absurdity hits hard. She corresponded with Diderot about freedom while signing decrees that let nobles flog serfs to death without trial. In 1767, she banned serfs from petitioning her directly. Too many complaints about torture, apparently. One noble, Daria Saltykova, was convicted of murdering 138 serfs, mostly women, by beating, scalding, or freezing them. Catherine's punishment? A light slap. Saltykova was imprisoned, not executed, and the system chugged on. The pain? For serfs, it was endless. Families were split, children sold away, women assaulted by landowners with impunity. Picture a serf's life, waking in a dirt-floored hut, no heat, no shoes, trudging to fields under a foreman's lash. Your harvest? Taken. Your daughter? Taken. Your life? Worth less than a noble's hunting dog. Catherine's court glittered, but it rested on bones. During her reign, she granted nobles millions of acres, each with thousands of serfs attached. Her lovers got estates, her generals got villages. The cost? Human lives, erased as casually as Pugachev's name. The sarcasm stings. Catherine, who wept over Rousseau's writings, upheld a system where a noble could trade a serf for a horse. One story, a serf named Ivan, caught stealing bread, was buried alive as punishment on Catherine's estate. Her response? A shrug and a new decree expanding noble rights. Enlightened, indeed. Engage? Could you survive as a serf under Catherine? Comment your escape plan or accept your fate? The revolting part? She knew better. Her letters to Voltaire admit serfdom's evils, but she claimed reform was too risky. Risky for whom? Her throne. Every rebellion, Pugachev's wasn't the only one, was crushed with such ferocity that serfs learned to stay silent. By 1796, her death year, serfdom was harsher than when she started. Her legacy? An empire expanded, a people crushed. And the pain wasn't just physical. Serfs were stripped of dignity, their culture mocked. Catherine's court adopted French fashion, scorning peasant traditions as backward. Yet those peasants built her palaces, fed her feasts, died in her wars. The absurdity, she'd stage peasant festivals where nobles dressed as serfs for fun, while real ones starved outside. One chilling tale, during a 1780s famine, serfs on an estate begged for grain. The noble, a Catherine loyalist, sent dogs to disperse them. Dozens died. Catherine's response? A donation to a French opera house. The cauchemar of history, power built on suffering, excused with a quill. As we near 2,000 words, let's tease. Part 3. Number 1's horrors set the stage for how Catherine's habits intertwined. Lovers, feasts, propaganda, serfdom, all a grotesque dance of power. Part 3 will tie it together, with more absurdities and a deeper dive into her legacy's cost. One last story. A peasant girl, Maria, was treated as property when her master lost a bet. At just 12, she was handed over to serve strangers. Under Catherine's laws, Nobles could do as they pleased with the people bound to their estates. That's the revolting truth of Catherine's Russia. What's your take on serfdom's horrors? Comment your thoughts, and stay tuned for Part 3's madness. Here we go, plunging back into the cesspool of Catherine the Great's revolting habits, where the glitz of her Russian Empire masks a carnival of cruelty and absurdity. Missed the last part? We exposed her propaganda machine that erased rebellions and her complicity in serfdom's horrors. Yep, the Empress of Enlightenment was knee-deep in human misery. Now, Part 3 ties it all together, weaving her grotesque habits into a tapestry of power that's equal parts genius and grotesque. Which habit has you gagging the most? Drop it in the comments, and let's see if you guessed number 1 right. Buckle up, this is about to get grimly hilarious. We've covered her lover carousel, where men were used and discarded like last season's wigs. Her feasts that could feed armies while peasants ate dirt. Her medical quackery that turned her into a shivering, mercury-poisoned mess. And her propaganda that rewrote reality with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. But number 1, oh, it's the crown jewel of Revolting. Her ruthless obsession with control, a habit so pervasive it turned her court into a gilded prison and her empire into a machine of suffering, all while she smiled like a philosopher queen. This wasn't just ruling, it was orchestrating a nightmare where every move was calculated, every dissent crushed, and every soul bent to her will. Picture Street, Petersburg, in the 1780s, a city of frozen canals and overheated intrigues. The Winter Palace sparkles, but its corridors hum with fear. Nobles whispering, spies eavesdropping, servants trembling. Catherine, now in her 50s, is at the peak of her power, her hair powdered to hide the gray, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. She's survived coups, rebellions, and assassination plots, but survival in this era, it's a daily dance with death. The air reeks of tallow candles and unwashed bodies, because bathing was still a gamble with evil humors. Smallpox scars pockmark faces, and the court's opulence hides the stench of chamber pots emptied into courtyards. This is the stage for Catherine's ultimate habit. Control so absolute it warped everything. Her lovers, her feasts, her propaganda, her serfs, into tools of her will. Why is this revolting? Because it wasn't just power. It was a pathological need to dominate every breath, every thought, every scrap of Russia. She didn't just rule, she possessed. Her lovers, those dashing officers we laughed about in Part 1, they weren't just bedmates, they were puppets. Grigory Potemkin, the one-eyed mastermind, was her greatest ally, but even he was kept on a leash. When he grew too influential, she promoted younger favorites like Platon Zubov to dilute his power. The pain? Imagine being Potemkin, a war hero who conquered Crimea, reduced to managing her bedroom roster. The absurdity? She'd quiz her lovers on state affairs mid-tryst, turning pillow talk into policy briefings. Revolting. The emotional carnage. Men reduced to tools, discarded when their loyalty wavered. Let's zoom in. Take Ivan Rimsky-Korsakov, a handsome favorite in the 1770s. He was showered with estates, then banished when he dared flirt with a rival noblewoman. His crime? Thinking he had autonomy. Catherine's control extended to their minds. She demanded devotion, not just obedience. One story has her ordering a lover's letters intercepted, read aloud at court to humiliate him, then sending him to govern a backwater province. The sarcasm drips, fall in love with the Empress, and you're signing up for a gilded guillotine. Engage time. If you were one of Catherine's favorites, would you play her game or plot your escape? Comment your strategy. Let's see who's cunning enough to survive. This habit bled into her feasts, those gluttonous spectacles from Part 1. They weren't just about food, they were control in action. Every dish, every guest, every toast was choreographed. Nobles were seated by loyalty, not rank. Displease her, and you're at the kids' table with watered-down kvass. One banquet saw a duke demoted mid-meal for criticizing her Polish policy. He was sent to inspect Siberian forts the next day. The pain? Courtiers lived in terror, knowing a wrong word could end their careers. The absurdity? She'd quiz ambassadors on philosophy while serving them bear paws, testing their flattery under pressure. Revolting? The waste? Millions of rubles on feasts while famine killed thousands. One winter, 1787, saw 100,000 peasants starve. But Catherine's table groaned with imported oysters. Her medical obsessions, number 3, were also about control. She didn't just endure ice baths and leeches, she enforced them on her court. In 1768, after her smallpox inoculation, she mandated it for her nobles, turning palaces into feverish clinics. Those who resisted, exiled, or shamed. One countess, scarred from the procedure, was mocked at court for her cowardice. The sarcasm, Catherine, the enlightened, forcing pus into arms while preaching progress. The pain, courtiers risked death to prove loyalty, their bodies collateral in her quest for immortality. And her propaganda number 2? Pure control. The Pugachev rebellion's erasure wasn't just about saving face, it was about owning history. She banned books, censored poets, and rewrote chronicles to make her reign flawless. One historian, caught documenting serf abuses, was sent to a monastery to reflect. His manuscripts? Burned. The absurdity, she'd debate Voltaire on truth while torching it at home. The pain. For intellectuals, it was a choice between silence or Siberia. Revolting. The erasure of lives, like the serfs who died in rebellions, their stories buried to protect her myth. Now let's dive into serfdom, the grim climax from part 2, because it's where her control fetish turned monstrous. Serfdom wasn't just a system, it was Catherine's foundation. Her empire, its wars, its palaces, its feasts, ran on serf blood. She granted nobles 20 million acres during her reign, each with thousands of souls attached. Her habit of control meant tightening their chains. In 1765, she gave nobles the right to punish serfs without state oversight. Result? Atrocities. One noble, Nikolai Stroisky, built a torture chamber for disobedient serfs, flaying them alive. Catherine's response? A fine, because he didn't file paperwork. The pain of serfdom was unimaginable. Picture a family, Ivan, Anna, their daughter Katya. They work 16-hour days, their hands blistered from plows. Their lord demands half their grain, then sells Katya to settle a debt. She's 14, sent to a manor as a maid. You know what that means. Even protests, he's whipped, branded, sent to the mines. Anna starves, alone. This wasn't rare. It was routine. Catherine's decrees made nobles untouchable, their cruelty unchecked. The sarcasm, she'd write about humane laws while serfs were buried alive for stealing turnips. Engage. Could you endure a serf's life, or would you join Pugachev's rebellion? Comment your choice, rebel or survive. The absurdity peaks with her reforms. Her 1767 legislative commission promised justice, but serfs weren't invited. Nobles debated their own privileges while serfs died outside. The commission fizzled, producing nothing but a 600-page report Catherine shelved. Why? Control. Freeing serfs risked noble rebellion, and she'd rather crush peasants than her allies. By 1796, serfdom was worse. Nobles could exile serfs to Siberia without cause. One case, a serf, Piotr, caught reading a French pamphlet, was sent to the Arctic. His crime? Curiosity. Let's tell a story. In 1789, during a famine, a serf village sent a delegate, Mikhail, to beg for relief. He walked 200 miles dodging wolves and bandits, only to be arrested for vagrancy. Catherine's governor had him flogged, his back a lattice of scars, then sold to a salt mine. The village? Starved. Catherine, meanwhile, was hosting a masquerade where nobles dressed as happy peasants. The revolting irony, her control crushed hope, turning enlightenment into a cruel joke. This habit tied everything together. Lovers were controlled to secure loyalty, feasts controlled nobles' egos, propaganda controlled history, serfdom controlled the empire's engine. But the cost? A nation of broken bodies and silenced voices. Catherine's Russia expanded. Crimea, Poland, the Black Sea, but at what price? Millions lived in chains, their pain fueling her glory. The cauchemar of survival hits hard. Imagine waking daily, knowing one mistake could end you. A noble's whim, a bad harvest, a whispered complaint, death or exile. Catherine's court was a chessboard, and she was the queen, moving pawns without mercy. One noblewoman caught plotting was shaved bald and sent to a convent. Her crime, suggesting Paul, Catherine's son, should rule. The pain, entire families erased for a word. And the absurdity? Catherine believed she was Russia's savior. Her memoirs, written in French for posterity, paint her as a reluctant ruler, forced to wield power for the greater good. Sure, if good means 34 years of wars, rebellions, and misery. She died in 1796, mid-stroke on a commode, ironic given her control obsession. Her legacy? A stronger Russia, but one built on bones. Engage. What's the most controlling thing a ruler could do today? Comment your thoughts, and let's compare modern madness to Catherine's. As we hit 2,000 words, let's tease part 4. We'll wrap her habits into a final verdict. Was Catherine a visionary or a monster? Plus, more absurd tales, like the time she banned coffee, fearing it sparked rebellion, only to reverse it when her headaches returned. What's your final guess for her legacy? Drop it in the comments. One last tale. A surf boy, Alexei, 10, caught stealing a noble's apple. Punishment? His hand was crushed under a cartwheel. Catherine's law allowed it. Nobles controlled their serfs. Alexei's fate? He died of infection, unmourned. That's the revolting truth of her reign. Stay tuned for Part 4's grand finale. Welcome to the grand finale of Catherine the Great's revolting habits, where we wrap up this grim, absurd, and darkly hilarious dive into her world of power and pain. If you're just joining us, we've already dissected her lover-dumping obsession, her gluttonous feasts, her quack medical experiments, her propaganda machine, and her chilling control fetish that turned Russia into her personal chessboard. Now, Part 4 stitches it all together, delivering a final verdict on whether Catherine was a visionary or a monster. What's your take? Drop it in the comments, and let's see if you nailed her legacy. Get ready for one last plunge into the cauchemar of 18th century Russia. Sarcasm, suffering, and all. Let's set the scene one final time. St. Petersburg, 1796. Catherine's final year. The Winter Palace glitters under a crust of snow, but inside, it's a pressure cooker of paranoia and perfume. The Empress, now 67, is slower, her face lined, her teeth long gone, replaced with walrus ivory dentures that click ominously when she speaks. Her court is a minefield. Nobles scheme, lovers jockey for favor, and serfs toil in the shadows, their lives worth less than the gold leaf on her walls. Survival here is a brutal game, where one misstep means exile, a flogging, or worse. The air stinks of candle smoke, sweat, and the faint rot of a society built on oppression. This is Catherine's Russia, a land of Enlightenment ideals and medieval horrors, where her revolting habits wove a tapestry of control that suffocated millions. We've ranked her habits, but they're not separate quirks. They're a grotesque symphony. Number 5, her lover carousel, was about securing loyalty through seduction and disposal. Grigory Orlov, who helped her seize the throne, was tossed aside when his jealousy grew inconvenient. Platon Zubov, her final favorite, was barely 22 when she, at 60, made him a prince. The pain? Men reduced to pawns, their egos and hearts crushed. The absurdity? She'd gift them estates one day, then exile them the next for a stray glance. Revolting? The clinical efficiency? Her lady-in-waiting tested candidates like livestock, ensuring they met imperial standards before being discarded like spoiled meat. Number 4, her feasts were control disguised as excess. Tables groaned with swan and caviar while peasants starved, their grain stolen to feed her guests. One 1787 banquet featured a mechanical peacock that served sherbet, built while famine killed 100,000. The sarcasm? Catherine, champion of progress, hosting peasant balls where nobles mocked the very people dying for her empire. The pain? Servants worked to collapse, knowing a spilled goblet could mean a beating. Revolting? The hygiene, or lack thereof. Guests ate with unwashed hands, dipping into communal bowls in a cholera-riddled age. Number 3, her medical quackery turned her body and court into a lab for torture. Ice baths, leeches, mercury tonics, she embraced it all, believing they'd keep her young. Her 1768 smallpox inoculation was brave but grim, rubbing pus into cuts while courtiers watched, terrified they'd be next. The absurdity? She forced her nobles to follow, turning palaces into fever wards. The pain, scars, infections, and deaths from cures worse than diseases. Revolting? Her collection of medical oddities, jars of deformed fetuses displayed like art, a grotesque flex of control over life itself. Number 2, her propaganda erased truth to cement her myth. The Pugachev Rebellion, a near collapse of her empire, was rewritten as a minor scuffle. Pugachev's head on a pike. Forgotten. Villages he burned? Renamed? The pain? For serfs, it was erasure. Their suffering didn't exist in her story. The sarcasm? She debated liberty with Voltaire while censoring poets into silence. Revolting? The scale? Entire histories burned, intellectuals exiled, all to make her reign shine. And number 1, her obsession with control tied it all together. Lovers, feasts, medicine, propaganda, serfdom, Every habit was a cog in her machine of dominance. She didn't just rule Russia, she owned it, body and soul. Her court was a panopticon, every whisper monitored, every dissent crushed. One noble, caught plotting, was shaved bald and sent to a convent. Another, a general, was erased from records for skimming funds. The pain? A nation living in fear, where a wrong word meant Siberia. The absurdity? She believed she was Russia's savior, writing memoirs that painted her as a reluctant hero while serfs were traded like horses. Let's dive deeper into this control fetish, because it's the rotten core of her reign. Serfdom, the backbone of her empire, was where it hit hardest. Over 10 million serfs, half Russia's population, lived in chains, their lives at the mercy of nobles she empowered. Her 1765 decree let landowners punish serfs without oversight, unleashing horrors. One noblewoman, Darya Saltykova, tortured 138 serfs to death, beating, scalding, freezing them. Catherine's response? A cushy prison sentence, because Saltykova was connected. The sarcasm? An enlightened ruler, letting nobles play God while preaching justice. Picture a serf's life. You're Anna, 30, waking in a freezing hut, your children hungry. You toil 16 hours, your back scarred from whips. Your son, stolen to fight in Catherine's wars, dies in Crimea. Your daughter, taken by the Lord for service, never returns. You steal a potato to survive. You're buried alive. This was legal. Catherine's laws made nobles untouchable. The pain? Entire families erased, their humanity stripped. The revolting truth? She knew. Her letters to Diderot admit serfdom's evils, but reform was too risky. Risky for her throne, not the millions suffering. Engage. If you were a serf, would you risk rebellion or endure in silence? Comment your choice. Let's see who's got the guts. The absurdity peaks with her reforms. Her 1767 legislative commission was a farce. Nobles debated their own power while serfs weren't even mentioned. It produced a 600-page report she ignored because control trumped progress. When serfs petitioned for freedom, she banned their complaints in 1767, silencing their cries. One serf, Vasily, walked 300 miles to plead for his village. He was flogged and sent to the mines. The sarcasm? Catherine, friend of philosophers, crushing hope with a quill. Let's tell a story. In 1790, a serf named Maria, 15, was sold to pay her lord's gambling debt. She was sent to a brothel for officers, her life over before it began. Catherine's laws allowed this. Nobles owned serfs' bodies. Maria's father, Ivan, protested. He was blinded with hot irons and died in a ditch. The village mourned in secret, knowing spies reported disloyalty. Catherine, meanwhile, was penning a comedy for her theater, laughing over champagne. The cauchemar. Her control turned humans into property, their pain a footnote. Her control extended to her family. Her son Paul, the heir, was a threat. Rumors said he wasn't Peter III's, but a lover's. So she sidelined him, raising his sons herself to mold them. Paul lived in a gilded cage, paranoid, hating her. The pain? A mother-son bond shattered by power. The absurdity? She painted herself as a doting matriarch in propaganda, while Paul plotted revenge. Revolting. Her memoirs rewrite him as unstable, ensuring her narrative outlived her. Even her death was a final act of control, or lack thereof. In 1796, she suffered a stroke on the commode, dying hours later. The irony, the empress who controlled everything couldn't control her end. Rumors flew. She was crushed by a horse, poisoned by Paul. Lies, but they stuck because her habits invited scandal. Her legacy? A stronger Russia, Crimea, Poland, the Black Sea, but built on misery. Serfdom worsened, rebellions crushed, truth erased. Engage? Was Catherine a visionary or a monster? Comment your verdict, and let's debate her legacy. Now, the final verdict. Catherine was both visionary and monster, a paradox of progress and cruelty. She modernized Russia's army, founded schools, and corresponded with Enlightenment giants, but her habits, lovers, feasts, quackery, propaganda, control, reveal a woman who prioritized power over people. Her reforms were half-hearted, her compassion selective. She expanded an empire while enslaving millions, her enlightenment a veneer over barbarism. The sarcasm, she dreamed of freedom while tightening chains. The pain, a nation built on broken backs. The absurdity, history calls her great. One last tale. A surf boy, Dmitri, 12, caught carving a wooden toy, a forbidden luxury. His lord, a Catherine loyalist, had his fingers crushed. Dmitri died of fever, his toy burned. Catherine's Russia allowed this, her control enabling cruelty. That's the revolting truth. What's your final thought on Catherine? Monster, genius, or both? Comment below, and let's keep this history alive. Hey guys, picture this. A bunch of sunburnt wanderers from sunny Turkey haul massive stones across foggy Britain, building a giant rock calendar that screams eternal mystery, only for modern DNA to spill the beans that these folks weren't even local. Talk about ancient immigrants stealing the show. But was Stonehenge a monument to unity, or just a desperate bid to survive in a brutal world? Stick around. This tale's got twists sharper than a flint knife. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Oh, the irony of history, folks. It's like a cosmic joke where the punchline is always human suffering wrapped in absurd grandeur. We're talking about Stonehenge, that enigmatic circle of stones standing defiant on Salisbury Plain, whispering secrets to the wind for millennia. But recent DNA sleuthing has yanked the curtain back, revealing that its builders weren't the rugged native Britons we'd romanticized. No, they were migrants from the sun-baked shores of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. Imagine that. A bunch of Neolithic nomads packing up their goats and grudges, trekking thousands of miles to a drizzly island where the sun plays hide-and-seek, all to erect a monument that would baffle us for ages. It's the ultimate historical absurdity. Foreigners building Britain's most iconic landmark, while the locals got sidelined like yesterday's leftovers. And beneath the glamour, the raw pain of survival in a prehistoric nightmare where every step was a gamble against starvation, disease, and the whims of a merciless nature. Let's rewind the clock to around 6000 BC, when Britain was a wild, untamed playground for hunter-gatherers. These folks were the original inhabitants, descendants of the first humans who wandered in after the last ice age thawed out, around 10,000 BC. Picture them, scruffy bands of foragers, eking out a living in dense forests and misty moors, chasing deer with sharpened sticks and scavenging berries like it was an endless camping trip from hell. No cozy farms, no Netflix, just constant hustling for food in a world where winter could turn you into a popsicle overnight. The pain? Oh, it's visceral. Broken bones from failed hunts, infections from thorn pricks that festered without antibiotics, and the ever-present specter of famine when the game migrated or the nuts didn't drop. Survival wasn't a choice. It was a daily brawl with Mother Nature, who clearly had a grudge against humanity. These hunter-gatherers with their dark skin and blue eyes, thanks to that DNA magic, roamed in small clans, maybe 20 to 30 souls strong, building flimsy shelters from branches and hides. They'd gather around flickering fires, telling stories of mammoth ghosts or whatever beasts they'd mythologized to make sense of the chaos. But here's the sarcasm dripping in. They thought they had the island to themselves, a verdant paradise of endless hunts. Little did they know, across the seas, a wave of change was brewing in the Fertile Crescent, where some clever folks had figured out how to boss plants and animals around. Agriculture, the great equalizer, or was it the great enslaver? Suddenly, humans weren't at nature's mercy. They were chaining it to their will, planting seeds and herding sheep like mini-gods. But with great power came great absurdity. Overpopulation, back-breaking labor, and the joy of watching your crops wither under a bad sky. Enter the Anatolian farmers, the stars of our DNA drama. Around 8000 BC, in the hills of what we call Turkey, these innovators domesticated wheat, barley, and those stubborn goats. Life got a tad less nomadic, villages sprouted like weeds, and populations boomed. But paradise? Hardly. The pain of survival kicked in harder, droughts that turned fields to dust, raids from jealous neighbors, and the sheer drudgery of tilling soil with stone tools that blistered your hands raw. Why stick around when rumors of greener pastures whispered across the winds? So they packed up, families lugging seeds, livestock, and dreams of a better life, embarking on a migration that would reshape Europe. First, they hopped to Greece, then island jumped through the Mediterranean, hugging coasts like scared sailors avoiding the deep blue unknown. Imagine the journey, folks. Pure historical nightmare fuel. Boats, more like rickety rafts of lashed logs, bobbing on waves that could swallow you whole, storms whipping salt into your eyes, kids crying from seasickness, and the constant fear of pirates or hostile shores. They landed in Iberia, modern Spain and Portugal, around 5,500 BC, blending with local hunter-gatherers in a messy genetic tango. But push on they did, driven by that absurd human itch for more. More land, more food, more security in a world that offered none. By 4000 BC, their descendants were eyeing Britain across the Channel, that foggy isle teeming with untapped potential. Or so they thought. Crossing the water? Another roll of the dice. Currents could drag you out to sea, fog could disorient you into crashing on rocks, and if you made it, what awaited? Not a welcome party, but those native hunter-gatherers, wary of these strangers with their weird farming gadgets and foreign tongues. The arrival was no picnic. These Anatolian migrants, pale-skinned, brown-eyed folks carrying genes from the Near East, brought pottery, polished stone axes, and the revolutionary idea of settling down. But integration? Ha! The absurdity peaks here. Two worlds colliding like oil and water. The natives, masters of the wild hunt, looked at these farmers plowing up sacred groves and probably thought, who invited the dirt diggers? Conflicts flared, arrows flying over disputed territories, raids on granaries that left families starving. The pain? For the migrants, it was burying kin lost to skirmishes or the harsh British winters that froze their imported crops. For the natives, it was watching their way of life erode as forests fell to fields, game grew scarce, and diseases jumped from domesticated animals to humans like uninvited guests at a feast. Yet, survive they did, these plucky farmers. Within a few generations, DNA tells us, they largely replaced the hunter-gatherers, not through some genocidal blitz, but a slow, inexorable wave of numbers and tech. The natives dwindled, perhaps outbred or assimilated, their genes fading to a whisper in modern Brits. By 3500 BC, Britain was a patchwork of Neolithic settlements, long barrows for the dead, causewayed enclosures for gatherings, and the first hints of monumental ambition. Life was a grind, waking at dawn to hoe fields with antler picks, grinding grain on quernstones until your arms screamed, and praying to whatever spirits you believed in that the harvest wouldn't fail. Famine was a frequent visitor, turning bellies hollow and eyes desperate. Women bore children amid the dirt, with no midwives beyond tribal elders, and half those kids didn't see their 5th birthday, claimed by infections or malnutrition. But oh, the irony. From this toil sprang culture. These migrants built henges, circular ditches and banks that dotted the landscape like ancient crop circles. Woodhenge, Avebury. These were their warm-ups, absurdly massive projects in a time when survival hung by a thread. Why bother? Maybe to appease gods who seemed perpetually pissed off, or to mark solstices for planting cycles. The pain beneath? Slaves to the seasons. These folks hauled earth with baskets and deer antlers, backs breaking under the load, all while dodging wolves or rival clans. Drop a comment. If you were a Neolithic farmer, would you risk it all for a stone circle, or stick to hunting? What's your survival strategy in this prehistoric mess? As settlements grew, so did the absurdity of social hierarchies. Chieftains emerged, big men with the best axes and the most wives, lording over villages from timber longhouses. Feasts became power plays, slaughter a pig, share the meat, and boom, you've got loyalty. But the underbelly, inequality festered. The have-nots toiled harder, their bones later showing arthritis from endless labor, while elites buried themselves with jadeite axes imported from the Alps. Talk about ancient bling signaling. And women? Often the unsung heroes, weaving baskets, tending fires, and birthing the next generation amid the chaos. Their pain? Childbirth without painkillers, endless domestic drudgery, and the constant threat of raids that could turn you into a captive, or worse. By around 3000 BC, the stage was set for Stonehenge's genesis. Phase 1. A simple ditch and bank with wooden posts and maybe some bluestones dragged from Wales, over 150 miles away. The absurdity? In a world where wheels were a novelty, they had them for pottery but not carts yet, these folks manhandled 2-ton rocks across rivers and hills. Why Wales? Legend says magic, but reality screams status. Rare stones to flex on neighbors. The pain of survival shines here. Gangs of workers, roped together like human oxen, heaving under the sun or rain, blisters turning to calluses, accidents crushing limbs. One slip, and you're a pancake under a megalith. Yet, they persisted, driven by that human folly of legacy building amid existential dread. Imagine a day in the life of one of these builders, say, a young migrant descendant named Alara. Yeah, I'm giving her a name for that sarcastic touch, because history forgot the individuals in its grand narratives. Alara wakes in a roundhouse of wattle and daub, the thatch leaking from last night's downpour. Her family's crammed in, parents, siblings, maybe a goat for company. Breakfast? Porridge from emmer wheat, gritty and bland, washed down with water that might give you the runs. Then off to the fields, hoeing weeds with a stone tool that dulls faster than your enthusiasm, back bent like a question mark. Lunch? A hunk of cheese if you're lucky, shared with flies. Afternoon, communal labor at the henge site, where the chieftain barks orders from his fur-clad perch. You dig with antler picks, earth caking your skin, sweat-stinging cuts. Evening, collapse by the fire, stories of ancestral journeys from distant lands fueling dreams of something better. But reality bites. A toothache from bad diet could kill you slowly, no dentist in sight. The migrations didn't stop, adding layers to the absurdity. Around 2500 BC, whispers of new arrivals from the east. The Beaker people, steppe nomads with bronze weapons and a taste for conquest. But that's for later. Right now, our Anatolian heirs are peaking. Stonehenge evolves, massive sarsens from local quarries, 30-ton beasts erected in a horseshoe, aligned with the sun like a cosmic clock. The engineering? Mind-boggling for the time. Levers, ramps, sheer manpower. But the pain? Workers dying from exhaustion, families mourning lost providers, all for a monument that might have been a healing site, a calendar, or just a big "look at us" to the gods. Sarcasm alert. Nothing says we're thriving like risking life and limb to stack rocks while your kids starve if the hunt fails. And the rituals? Oh, the dark undercurrents. Pig feasts at Durrington Walls, the builders' camp nearby. Thousands of bones suggest massive parties, but with a twist. Human remains too, hinting at sacrifices or cannibalism. The absurdity of appeasing deities with blood while begging for rain. Survival's nightmare. Believe or perish. Alara might witness a solstice ceremony, crowds chanting as the sun rises through the stones, hope flickering like the dawn. But winter solstice? Mourning the dead, the pain of loss amplified by the cold. As we wrap this first chunk of our epic, the migrants' trek from Anatolia to Albion, turning wilds into wonders amid endless toil. Ponder this. Were these builders visionaries or just desperate survivors in an absurd historical lottery? Drop a comment with your wildest theory on Stonehenge's purpose. Alien landing pad or ancient party spot? And stay tuned for part 2, where the Beaker invaders crash the scene, bronze clashes with stone, and the pain escalates. You won't want to miss the twists. All right, folks, we're diving back into the muddy, mystical mess of Stonehenge's story, where ancient migrants from Anatolia turned a soggy British plain into a rock star monument, only for new players to storm in and shake things up. Picture this. Just as our Neolithic farmers think they've mastered survival with their fancy stone circle, a crew of bronze-wielding, beer-loving nomads from the steppes crashes the party, bringing shiny weapons and shadier motives. Was this a cultural glow-up or a hostile takeover? Stick around because the absurdity of history is about to hit new heights, with survival's pain as the grim backdrop. Drop a comment with your take on who'd win in a prehistoric showdown, farmers or nomads. Let's get into it. We left off around 3000 BC, with our Anatolian-derived farmers, pale-skinned, weed-obsessed folks, busting their backs to build Stonehenge's first phase, a ditch, some posts, and those mysterious bluestones hauled from Wales. These people, descendants of migrants who trekked from modern-day Turkey, had transformed Britain from a hunter-gatherer's playground into a patchwork of fields and henges. But life wasn't exactly a pastoral picnic. The pain of survival was relentless. Grueling labor under a fickle sky, diseases that turned your insides to mush, and the constant fear of rival clans stealing your hard-won grain. Yet, they poured their sweat into Stonehenge, a monument that screamed ambition but whispered desperation. Why? Maybe to track the sun, maybe to heal the sick, or maybe just to flex on neighboring tribes. The absurdity? Risking it all for a pile of rocks when your next meal wasn't guaranteed. Fast forward to around 2500 BC, and enter the Beaker people, named for their fancy bell-shaped pottery, because apparently, even prehistory had branding. These folks weren't local either. Their DNA traces back to the Pontic-Caspian steppes, a vast grassland stretching from Ukraine to Kazakhstan. Picture them, rugged nomads, rocking bronze daggers, horse-riding skills, and a penchant for single-grave burials that screamed, Look at me, I'm important. They were the descendants of the Yamnaya, a cattle-herding warrior culture who'd already swept through Europe, mixing with locals and leaving a genetic fingerprint so strong it's still in most modern Europeans. Their arrival in Britain wasn't a friendly exchange program, it was a seismic shift, and our Anatolian farmers were about to get a reality check. Let's zoom in on a farmer named Torin. Yeah, I'm naming him for that sarcastic kick, because history loves to forget the little guy. Torin's life is a grind in a Wiltshire village near Stonehenge. He wakes in a smoky roundhouse, the air thick with the stench of damp straw and last night's stew. His hands, calloused from years of wielding a flint hoe, ache as he trudges to the fields. His family's scraping by on barley porridge and the occasional rabbit, but hunger's a constant companion. Crop failures are as predictable as British rain. His kids, skinny and coughing, help gather firewood, while his wife weaves baskets to trade for salt. The pain? Knowing one bad harvest could wipe them out, or a wolf could snatch a child in the night. Survival's a tightrope, and Torin's got no safety net. Then, one misty morning, strangers appear on the horizon, tall, armed with shiny bronze axes that glint like trouble. The Beaker folk aren't here to borrow a cup of grain. Their arrival, starting around 2400 BC, marks a cultural earthquake. DNA evidence is brutal. Within a few centuries, up to 90% of Britain's gene pool shifts to steppe ancestry. Were the farmers slaughtered? Probably not en masse. Genocide's a stretch. But skirmishes? Oh, absolutely. Imagine Torin's clan armed with flint-tipped spears, facing bronze-wielding nomads who've spent generations perfecting the art of cracking skulls. The absurdity. The farmers' stone tools, once cutting-edge, now look like kids' toys against metal that slices like butter. But it's not just about weapons. The Beakers brought a whole lifestyle reboot. They introduced metallurgy, bronze, that game-changing alloy of copper and tin, which meant sharper tools, deadlier weapons, and a new kind of swagger. They also brought, well, beer, or at least the pottery to drink it in. Bell beaker pots, with their intricate chord patterns, weren't just for show. They held fermented brews that probably made their feasts rowdier than the farmers' sober pig roasts. The pain for Torin's people? Their way of life, hard-won fields, sacred henges, was being upended. The Beakers didn't just farm. They herded cattle, roamed with horses, and buried their dead in solitary graves, not communal barrows. It's like the farmers woke up to find their neighborhood gentrified by cowboys with better tech. Stonehenge itself gets a makeover under Beaker influence. By 2500 BC, the big show begins. The massive sarsen stones, some weighing 30 tons, are dragged from nearby quarries, erected in a circle, and trilithons, topped with lintels like a prehistoric Lego set. The bluestones from Phase 1? Rearranged, because why not mess with a perfectly good monument? The absurdity peaks here. These people, still grappling with famine and disease, diverted manpower to haul megaliths across Salisbury Plain. Picture teams of dozens, maybe hundreds, chanting under a gray sky, ropes of twisted hemp cutting into shoulders, feet sinking into mud. One misstep, and a sarsen crushes you like an ant. Why do it? Maybe to align with the solstice, maybe to honor ancestors, or maybe just to say, we're here and we're not going anywhere. The pain, broken bodies, exhausted spirits, and the knowledge that your life's work might just be a fancy grave marker. Let's follow Torin to a construction site at Durrington Walls, the sprawling settlement near Stonehenge where workers lived. It's a bustling camp. Think Woodstock, but with more mud and fewer guitars. Roundhouses cluster like mushrooms, smoke curling from hearths where pig bones pile up from epic feasts. Torin's hauling timber for a new enclosure, his back screaming, his stomach growling despite the occasional pork handout. The Beakers are here too, their bronze pins gleaming on cloaks, their pottery fancier than the farmers' plain jars. Tensions simmer. Torin's clan whispers about these foreigners stealing land, while the Beakers scoff at the locals' backward ways. The irony? Both groups are migrants, just from different waves, yet they're ready to bash heads over who owns this patch of soggy dirt. The cultural clash isn't just about stuff, it's personal. Beaker burials show a new obsession with status. Single graves with grave goods like copper daggers, gold ornaments, and those signature beakers. Torin's people buried their dead in communal long barrows, bones mingled like a shared legacy. The Beakers? It's every man for himself, even in death. The pain? For farmers, it's watching their traditions erode as Beaker customs, individualism, metal, mobility, take over. Some farmers adopt the new ways, intermarrying, learning to cast bronze. Others resist, clinging to flint and henges, only to be marginalized or worse. DNA doesn't lie. The step genes dominate, suggesting the farmers either blended in or faded out, their numbers dwindling like embers in a storm. And oh, the survival nightmare intensifies. The Beakers brought horses, which meant faster raids. Imagine Torin's village waking to hoofbeats, Beaker warriors snatching grain and cattle before vanishing into the dusk. Disease, too, was a silent killer. The farmers cramped villages with pigs and humans living cheek by jowl, bred infections like plague precursors. Think Yersinia pestis, the Black Death's ancestor, which DNA hints was already lurking. The Beakers' nomadic roots didn't spare them. Their mobility spread germs faster. The pain? Watching your kids waste away from fever. No cure beyond a shaman's chant or a desperate offering at Stonehenge. Comment below. If you were Torin, would you fight the Beakers or join them? What's your survival play in this chaos? Stonehenge's purpose evolves with the Beakers. The Sarsen phase, with its precise solstice alignment, suggests a deeper obsession with the cosmos. Maybe a calendar to track planting seasons, maybe a temple for rituals we can only guess at. Excavations at Durrington reveal feasts, thousands of pig and cattle bones, suggesting massive gatherings where alliances were forged or gods appeased. But the dark side? Human bones with cut marks hint at sacrifice or worse. The absurdity, building a cosmic masterpiece while possibly eating your enemies or your kin. Survival meant superstition, and Stonehenge was the ultimate bet. Align the stones, please the spirits, maybe avoid starvation for another year. Women like Alara, Torin's sister, bear the brunt. She's weaving, grinding grain, birthing kids in a world where childbirth was a coin toss, survive or bleed out. Beaker influence shifts gender roles. Their burials show men with weapons, women with beads, suggesting a warrior culture that sidelined female power. The pain? Elara's labor fuels the village, but her voice is drowned out by chieftains and shamans. Yet, she persists, teaching her daughters to weave, maybe slipping a flint knife under her mat for protection. The irony? Her hands, worn from spinning wool, helped build a monument history credits to men. By 2000 BC, Stonehenge is peaking, its sarsens and bluestones a beacon of human will. But the Beakers aren't settling down. They're restless, trading tin from Cornwall, amber from the Baltic, their networks stretching across Europe. The farmers' old ways, communal, rooted, fade as Beaker individualism takes hold. Torin might adopt a bronze dagger, marry a Beaker woman, but he feels the loss. His ancestors' spirits, once honored in barrows, now seem forgotten. The absurdity. Stonehenge, built by his people's sweat, becomes a Beaker trophy, its original meaning warped by new rulers. Social hierarchies harden, Beaker chieftains, buried with gold and archery gear, lord over villages from hill forts. The have-nots, like Torin's kin, face worse arthritis, their bones etched with labor's toll, while elites flaunt imported trinkets. The pain? Inequalities sting as the gap between rich and poor grows wider than the channel. And the environment? It's turning hostile. Deforestation from farming and mining leaves hills bare, rains erode fields, and harvests falter. Survival's a gamble, and Stonehenge's stones stand silent as families starve. As we close this second chapter, the irony's thick. Migrants building a monument, only for new migrants to claim it, all while fighting nature and each other. Stonehenge is a testament to human ambition, but its builders paid in blood and blisters. Were the Beakers innovators or invaders? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's debate. And stick around for part 3, where Bronze Age Britain gets wilder. Trade booms, battles rage, and Stonehenge's mystique grows, all while survival remains a cruel game. You won't believe what's next. All right, folks, we're back in the gritty, stone-stacking saga of Stonehenge, where the mists of prehistoric Britain swirl around a monument built by sweaty, sunburnt migrants from Anatolia, only to be hijacked by bronze-wielding Beaker folk. Now, picture this. It's the Bronze Age, around 2000 BC, and Stonehenge is standing tall, a cosmic clock ticking through solstices, but the world around it's getting wilder. Trade routes buzzing, battles flaring, and survival's still a brutal game of chance. Were these folks building a legacy, or just clinging to hope in a world that loved to kick them down? Stick around, because the absurdity's about to crank up, with pain and irony as our trusty guides. Drop a comment with your wildest guess about what Stonehenge was really for. Shrine, star map, or ancient rave spot. Let's dive in. We're deep in the Bronze Age now, roughly 2000 to 1500 BC, and Britain's no longer just a patchwork of farms and henges. It's a bustling hub in a prehistoric network stretching from Cornwall's tin mines to the amber shores of the Baltic. The Beaker people, those step-descended nomads with their fancy pots and shinier weapons, have taken the reins, their DNA dominating the island's gene pool. The Anatolian farmers' descendants, like our pal Torin, are either blending in or fading out, their flint tools no match for bronze axes. Stonehenge, that enigmatic rock pile, is at its peak. Sarsens and bluestones aligned with eerie precision, a testament to human grit and cosmic obsession. But beneath the grandeur lies a nightmare of survival, back-breaking labor, disease-ridden villages, and a society where status meant everything, even if it cost you your life. Let's stick with Torin, our beleaguered farmer-turned-Beaker adoptee, living in a village near Stonehenge. His life's a daily slog, waking in a roundhouse that smells of damp wool and sour milk, his joints creaking from years of plowing fields with a bronze-tipped ard. Breakfast? A lumpy porridge of spelt, maybe a scrap of dried fish if the traders came through. His kids are out herding sheep, dodging wolves that prowl the shrinking forests, while his wife, Mara, spins wool with fingers raw from the spindle. The pain? Hunger's a constant shadow. One bad harvest, and you're eating bark or worse. Disease is a stealthy killer. A cut from a flint knife could fester into a fever that sends you to the ancestors. And the constant threat of raids, Beaker neighbors with grudges or rival tribes eyeing your cattle, keeps Torin sleeping with a dagger under his mat. Stonehenge itself is the star of the show, but it's no tourist trap yet. By 2000 BC, its final form is set. A circle of 30 sarsens, some topped with lintels, surrounding a horseshoe of 5 massive trilithons, with bluestones tucked in like sacred punctuation. The engineering's absurd for a people without wheels for heavy loads. Think hundreds of workers, ropes of twisted hide, and wooden sledges greased with pig fat, dragging stones across Salisbury Plain. One wrong move and you're crushed, your family left to starve. Why go to such lengths? Theories abound. A solar calendar to track planting seasons, a healing site where the sick came to touch magic bluestones, or a ritual ground for ancestor worship. The irony? These folks, barely scraping by, poured resources into a monument that might have been a giant prayer for survival in a world that didn't care. Zoom in on a solstice gathering at Stonehenge, and you'll see the Bronze Age in full swing. Torin's there, part of a crowd from far-flung villages, their cloaks pinned with bronze, eyes wide as the sun rises through the heelstone. Drums pound, fires crackle, and shamans chant, waving hazel wands like they're conducting the cosmos. Feasts at nearby Durrington walls are epic. Piles of cattle bones, evidence of thousands fed on roasted meat and early beer. But the dark side? Human remains with cut marks suggest sacrifice, maybe to appease gods who seemed perpetually unimpressed. The pain? Torin's offering a sheep, hoping it buys a good harvest, but deep down he knows nature's a fickle boss. The absurdity? Building a stone masterpiece to beg for rain while your kids' ribs show through their tunics. The Beaker's influence is everywhere, and it's not just about stones. Their bronze tech, axes, daggers, even jewelry, changes the game. Tin from Cornwall and copper from Wales fuel a trade boom, with Beaker traders trekking across Europe, swapping metal for amber, jet, or fancy shells. Torin's village is now a pit stop on this prehistoric Silk Road, with strangers bringing exotic goods and new ideas. But the pain? Trade means competition, and competition means conflict. Hill forts sprout like warts across the landscape. Maiden Castle, Danebury, where chieftains stockpile weapons and grain. Raids are common. A rival clan might torch your fields, steal your cows, or worse, take Mara as a captive bride. Survival's a chess game, and Torin's no knight, just a pawn with a plow. Social status is the new obsession, and it's dripping with irony. Beaker burials are like prehistoric Instagram. Single graves stuffed with bling, bronze daggers, gold hair rings, even archery kits for the afterlife. Compare that to the farmers' old communal barrows, where bones mingled like a shared legacy. Now, it's all about the individual, the big man with the shiniest toys. Torin sees it up close. The chieftain, draped in furs, gets a mound burial with a beaker of mead, while regular folks like him are lucky to get a shallow pit. The pain? Inequalities bite. Torin's labor feeds the village, but the chieftain's son inherits the power, not him. His bones, found millennia later, show wear from grinding grain, while the elites show no such strain. Absurd, right? Work yourself to death, and history remembers the guy with the gold. Women like Mara face their own nightmare. She's up before dawn, kneading dough, weaving cloaks, and birthing kids in a world where a breech birth could mean death for both mother and child. Beaker culture leans patriarchal. Burials show men with weapons, women with beads or spindles, suggesting a shift from the farmer's more egalitarian roots. The pain? Mara's toil keeps the village alive, but her voice is drowned out by male shamans and warriors. Yet she's no pushover. She hides a bronze pin, a gift from a trader, dreaming of a day she might trade it for something better. The irony? Her hands, cracked from spinning wool, helped build Stonehenge's legacy. But history credits the men who stood on the stones, not the women who fed them. The environment's turning against them too. Centuries of farming and mining strip the land bare. Forests vanish, soil erodes, and rains turn fields to mud. Torin's crops fail more often, forcing him to hunt or trade for food. The Beaker's cattle herding helps, but overgrazing leaves hills barren, and famine's a frequent guest. Disease stalks closer. Plague-like bacteria, spread by cramped villages and trade routes, wipe out entire clans. The pain? Watching your family waste away, no cure beyond a prayer at Stonehenge's altar. The absurdity? Building a cosmic monument while nature laughs at your hubris, sending storms to drown your hopes. Stonehenge's rituals grow darker. Excavations hint at cremations, burials, even possible human sacrifice. Skulls with trauma marks suggest not everyone went willingly. Was it to honor ancestors, appease gods, or scare off enemies? Torin might witness a winter solstice. The crowd hushed as a shaman slits a throat, blood soaking the earth to feed the spirits. The irony? They're begging for divine favor while their own tools, bronze, trade, hierarchy, create new problems. Survival's a gamble, and Stonehenge's their casino, where the house always wins. Trade networks bring wealth, but also trouble. Beaker traders link Britain to Europe, swapping tin for continental bronze or Baltic amber. Torin's village sees strangers with foreign accents, their carts laden with goods. But wealth breeds envy. Raids spike, hill forts grow walls, and chieftains hoard more. The pain? Torin's forced to pay tribute, grain, wool, even a daughter, to keep the peace. The absurdity? Stonehenge, meant to unite, becomes a backdrop for power plays, its stones silent as tribes feud over who controls the sacred site. Let's zoom in on a festival at Stonehenge. It's midsummer, the sun blazing through the trilithons, the air thick with smoke and sweat. Torin's there, offering a bronze dagger to the chieftain, hoping for favor. Mara's weaving a garland, her eyes on the horizon for raiders. The crowd chants, drums echo, and a cow's slaughtered, its blood pooling as an offering. The Beaker's influence shines. Bronze pins gleam, beakers brim with brew, but the farmer's old songs linger, a faint echo of lost ways. The pain? Knowing this unity's fragile, that tomorrow's raid could burn it all down. The irony? A monument to eternity, built by people who might not survive the winter. As we wrap this third chapter, the absurdity's clear. Stonehenge stands as a beacon of human will, but its builders, farmers, beakers, all migrants, paid in sweat, blood, and broken dreams. The Bronze Age brought progress, metal, trade, power, but also pain, inequality, war, and a land pushed to its limits. Were these folks visionaries or victims of their own ambition? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's stir the pot. And stay tuned for part 4, where Stonehenge's mystique deepens, the Bronze Age peaks, and new invaders loom, all while survival remains a cruel jest. You won't want to miss the finale. All right, folks, we're at the grand finale of our Stonehenge saga, where ancient migrants from Anatolia and bronze-swinging beaker folk turned a zoggy British plain into a cosmic monument, only for it to become a battleground of power, faith, and survival. Picture this. It's the late Bronze Age, around 1500 BC, and Stonehenge stands like a silent giant, its stones weathered but unyielding, while the world around it spirals into chaos. New invaders, collapsing trade, and a climate that's turning nasty. Were these people clinging to a fading dream or forging a legacy that'd outlast them all? Stick around, because the absurdity hits fever pitch, with survival's pain as the bitter cherry on top. Drop a comment with what you think Stonehenge's builders would say if they saw it today. Awed or annoyed. Let's wrap this epic with a bang. We're now in the late Bronze Age, roughly 1500 to 800 BC, and Britain's a land of flux. The Beaker people, those steppe-born nomads with their bronze daggers and fancy pots, have settled in. their DNA rewriting Britain's genetic story. The Anatolian farmers' descendants, like our friend Torin, are either absorbed or forgotten, their old ways buried under new hierarchies. Stonehenge, that mystical rock circle, is still the heart of the action, its sarsens and bluestones a beacon for rituals, trade, and power plays. But the world's changing fast. Trade networks are fraying, the climate's souring, and new waves of people are stirring on the horizon. Life's a brutal grind, and survival's a cruel jest. Build a monument to eternity, but don't expect to live through the winter. Let's stay with Torin, now older, his hair graying, his hands gnarled from decades of plowing and fighting. He lives in a fortified village near Stonehenge, its timber palisades a grim sign of the times. His day starts in a roundhouse, the air thick with smoke and the stench of unwashed wool. Breakfast is a meager barley gruel, maybe a scrap of smoked boar if the hunt went well. His wife, Mara, is weaving, her fingers bleeding from the spindle, while their kids, those who survived childhood fevers, herd cattle or sharpen bronze spears. The pain? Hunger's a constant guest, with harvest shrinking as the land rebels. Disease lurks, plague-like bugs, spread by trade and livestock, can wipe out a family in days. And raids? They're relentless, with rival clans or new arrivals eyeing Torin's meager stores. Survival's a knife edge, and Torin's too tired to romanticize it. Stonehenge itself is a paradox, revered, yet fading. By 1500 BC, it's no longer under construction, but it's far from abandoned. It's a sacred hub, drawing crowds for solstice rites, burials, and maybe even healing pilgrimages. The bluestones, hauled from Wales centuries ago, are still whispered to hold magic. Sick folk touch them, hoping for miracles. The absurdity. These people, starving and sore, trek miles to pray at stones while their villages crumble. Excavations show burials around Stonehenge, elites with bronze axes, commoners in shallow pits, even kids with tiny beads. The pain? Many skeletons bear marks of malnutrition or violence, proof that faith didn't fill bellies or stop arrows. The irony? A monument meant to defy time, surrounded by people who died young. Zoom in on a winter solstice at Stonehenge, and it's a scene of desperate devotion. Torin's there, shivering in a wool cloak, his breath fogging in the dawn chill. The crowd, hundreds from across Wessex, chants as the sun creeps over the heelstone, its weak rays a faint promise of spring. Shamans draped in furs burn herbs and slit a goat's throat, blood steaming on the frozen ground. Nearby, at Durrington Walls, feasts rage. Cattle bones pile high, but so do human ones, some with cut marks hinting at sacrifice or darker rites. The pain? Torin's offering his last sheep, knowing his kids might starve by spring. The absurdity? Worshipping a cosmic clock while nature laughs, sending frost to kill your crops. The Bronze Age world is unraveling, and the environment's the real villain. Around 1500 BC, the climate shifts. Colder, wetter, with storms that turn fields to swamps. Deforestation from centuries of farming and mining leaves hills bare, soil washing away like hope. Torin's barley yields shrink, forcing him to hunt deer or trade bronze for grain. The pain? Famine's no longer a threat. It's a neighbor, claiming kids and elders first. Overgrazing by beaker cattle strips pastures and peat bogs spread, swallowing land. The irony? Stonehenge, aligned to track seasons, stands useless as those seasons betray the farmers who built it. Trade, once a lifeline, is faltering. The beakers' networks, tin from Cornwall, amber from the Baltic, are strained as Europe's Bronze Age societies hit rough patches. Tin mines flood, copper's harder to get, and bronze becomes a luxury. Torin's village sees fewer traders, their carts replaced by raiders with bronze swords, longer, deadlier than daggers. Hill forts like Maiden Castle grow thicker walls, their ditches deep enough to trap a horse. The pain? Torin's forced to pay tribute to a chieftain, grain, wool, maybe a daughter, to avoid a raid. The absurdity? Building a sacred site to unite tribes, only for it to become a prize in their wars. Social hierarchies are now a brutal fact of life. Chieftains, buried with gold necklaces and bronze armor, live in hill fort palaces, while folks like Torin toil in the muck. Graves tell the story. Elites get lavish mounds, their skeletons free of labor's wear, while commoners' bones scream of arthritis and broken teeth from gritty diets. The pain? Torin's labor feeds the village, but he's invisible. His chieftain's son, barely 20, struts with a sword Torin could never afford. The irony? Stonehenge, meant to honor ancestors, becomes a stage for elites to flex, It's rituals reserved for those with the right bling. Women like Mara face a double burden. She's up before dawn, grinding grain on a quernstone until her shoulders burn, weaving cloaks to trade for salt, and tending kids who might not survive a fever. Beaker culture's patriarchal lean, men buried with weapons, women with beads, dims her role. The pain? Her work holds the village together, but shamans and warriors call the shots. Yet, Mara's no victim. She barters a bronze pin for extra grain, maybe whispers rebellion to other women by the fire. The irony? Her hands, worn to bone, help sustain a society that buries her in an unmarked grave, while history glorifies the men with swords. Conflict's the new normal. New groups, possibly early Celtic speakers, are stirring, their origins murky but their impact clear. By 1200 BC, bronze swords and shields hint at a warrior culture, with hill forts doubling as fortresses. Torrhen's village is raided, his granary burned, his son wounded by a bronze-tipped arrow. The pain. Rebuilding from ashes, knowing the next attack's coming. The absurdity. Stonehenge, a symbol of unity, watches silently as tribes slaughter each other for control of its sacred ground. Some archaeologists suggest it became a neutral zone, a place where feuding clans met under truce for rituals. Others say it was a trophy, fought over like a prehistoric crown. Rituals at Stonehenge grow stranger. Cremations increase, ashes scattered among the stones, suggesting a shift to sky burials or fire-based rites. Human sacrifices? Possible. Skulls with blunt trauma raise eyebrows. Was it to appease angry gods or intimidate rivals? Torrhen might witness a young warrior, bound and bleeding, offered to the solstice sun. The pain? Knowing anyone, friend, kin, could be next if the harvest fails. The irony? A monument to order, stained with blood to keep chaos at bay. By 1000 BC, Stonehenge's star is fading. The Bronze Age collapse, a mix of climate woes, trade breakdowns, and invasions, hits Europe hard. Britain's not spared. Villages shrink, hill forts empty, and Stonehenge sees fewer pilgrims. Torrhen's grandkids, raised on tales of its glory, live in a world where survival trumps sentiment. The pain? Watching a sacred site, built with ancestors' blood, become a relic as new gods and ways emerge. The irony? Stonehenge endures, its stones unyielding, while the people who built it vanish into history's fog. Let's linger on Torrhen and Mara. Torrhen, now in his 50s, is a ghost of himself, stooped, coughing, his body wrecked by labor. He visits Stonehenge one last time, offering a bronze ring, praying for his family's survival. Mara, tougher than the Sarsens, buries another child, her heart hardened but unbroken. Their legacy? Lost to time, their bones unmarked, yet their sweat lives in Stonehenge's stones. The absurdity. A monument outlasting its makers, its purpose debated by folks sipping coffee millennia later. As we close this saga, the irony's brutal. Migrants from Anatolia, beakers from the steppes, all poured their lives into Stonehenge, only to be erased by time, climate, and war. It stands as a testament to human will, ambition, faith, defiance, but its builders paid in pain, hunger, loss, and forgotten names. Were they dreamers or pawns in history's cruel game? Drop your verdict in the comments. Let's spark a debate. And tell me, what other ancient mystery should we unravel next? Stonehenge is done, but history's got more shadows to explore. Your call, folks. Imagine this. A teenage boy crowned Emperor of Rome, inheriting an empire vast enough to make gods jealous, only to turn it into his personal playground of depravity, murder, and musical theater. We're talking Nero, the fiddle-playing firestarter who made Caligula look like a choir boy. If you think modern scandals are juicy, wait till you hear about surviving ancient Rome, where one wrong glance could get you gutted. Which of Nero's twisted acts shocks you most? Comment below, and I'll shout out the craziest takes in part 2. Ah, the glory that was Rome. Or should I say, the grotesque farce that was Nero's reign. Picture the Eternal City in the mid-1st century AD, a sprawling metropolis of marble temples, bustling forums, and aqueducts carrying water purer than the morals of its rulers. But beneath the veneer of civilization lurked a nightmare. Streets choked with sewage, slaves whipped through markets like cattle, and emperors who treated power like a license for lunacy. Survival back then? A daily crapshoot. Plague could wipe out your family overnight. Gladiators fought for your entertainment while you dodged pickpockets, and if you crossed the wrong patrician, you'd end up as Lion Chow in the arena. Nero, that chubby-cheeked monster, amplified the absurdity to operatic levels. Born Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus in 37 AD, he was thrust into the imperial spotlight thanks to his scheming mother, Agrippina the Younger, a woman who made Lady Macbeth seem like a pushover. Let's start at the beginning, because even Nero's origin story drips with historical irony. His father, Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus, was a brute known for running over children with his chariot for fun. Talk about family values. He died when Nero was 3, leaving the boy to Agrippina's ambitions. She married her uncle, Emperor Claudius, in 49 AD and promptly poisoned him in 54 AD with a dish of mushrooms. Official cause? Bad luck. Reality? Agrippina's recipe for regime change. Nero at 16 became emperor, with his mother pulling the strings like a deranged puppeteer. But oh, the pain of it all. Young Nero, awkward and artistic, forced into a role where survival meant out-scheming the schemers. Rome's elite, the senators and equestrians, eyed him like vultures, whispering about his unmanly love for poetry and chariot racing. In a world where men proved themselves by conquering barbarians, Nero strummed his lyre and dreamed of stardom. Absurd. Utterly. Revolting? Wait till we get to the scandals. First scandal on our twisted tour, Nero's matricide, or how he turned Mommy Dearest into a maritime mishap. Agrippina wasn't content to rule from the shadows. She flaunted her power, appearing on coins beside her son and meddling in state affairs. Nero, growing resentful, decided she had to go. In 59 AD, he hatched a plan straight out of a bad Greek tragedy, a collapsible boat designed to drown her during a cruise on the Bay of Baiae. The vessel sank as planned, but Agrippina, tough as nails, swam ashore, bruised but alive. Nero's henchmen finished the job with swords, clubbing her to death in her villa. Her last words? "Strike the womb," she reportedly said, cursing the body that bore such a monster. The irony. Nero spread rumors that she plotted against him, staging a mock trial of her assassins. The pain of survival? For Agrippina's slaves and attendants, it was immediate execution to silence witnesses. Imagine living in a palace where your boss could off his own mother and throw a party afterward. Nero hosted games in her honor, but everyone knew the score. Whisper too loudly, and you'd join her in the afterlife. But let's not gloss over the absurdity. Nero, the emperor who fancied himself a god, couldn't even kill his mom efficiently. The boat fiasco became fodder for gossip across the empire, from Gaul to Syria. Senators chuckled behind closed doors, but publicly, they praised his piety, the nightmare of history. In Rome, truth was whatever the tyrant said it was. And the physical toll? Travel back then was hell. Roads rutted with potholes, ships tossed by storms, and no antibiotics for the infections that followed. Agrippina's swim? In waters fouled by Roman waste, risking tetanus or worse. Survival meant dodging not just daggers, but dysentery. Engage time. If you were Nero's advisor, would you have warned Agrippina or kept quiet to save your skin? Comment your survival tactic. I bet some of you would out-scheme them both. Moving to scandal number 2, Nero's marital mayhem, where love meant lethal. His first wife, Octavia, was a political match. Daughter of Claudius, innocent as a lamb. But Nero preferred Poppaea Sabina, a fiery beauty married to his friend Otho. In 58 AD, he divorced Octavia on trumped-up adultery charges, banishing her to a remote island. When the public rioted in her favor, crowds chanting, "Bring back Octavia," Nero had her veins slit in a hot bath, her head severed and sent to Poppaea as a gift. Charming, right? Poppaea became empress in 62 AD, but her fate was equally grim. Pregnant with their second child in 65 AD, she argued with Nero. He kicked her in the belly, causing her death. Official story, miscarriage, reality, imperial temper tantrum. Nero mourned dramatically, deifying her and building a temple, but soon married Statilia Messalina after executing her husband. The revolting part? These weren't crimes of passion. They were calculated. Octavia's death silenced a rival bloodline. Poppaea's elevated Nero's image as a grieving widower. The pain? For women in ancient Rome, survival was a gauntlet. Childbirth killed 1 in 5, domestic violence was normalized, and divorce meant destitution unless you had powerful kin. Octavia, isolated and accused, spent her last days in terror, her servants tortured for confessions. Absurdity alert. Nero, the self-proclaimed artist, composed elegies for his victims while their blood stained his hands. Imagine the court banquets where guests toasted the emperor, knowing he could turn on them next. One senator, caught yawning during Nero's lyre recital, was forced to suicide by opening his veins. Let's linger on the daily horrors. Rome's streets were a sensory assault, the stench of the Cloaca Maxima sewer, vendors hawking rotten fish, and beggars with leprosy-scarred limbs. Emperors like Nero lived in opulence. The Domus Aurea, his golden house, was under construction. But for the plebs, bread and circuses sure, but spiked with lead from aqueduct pipes, causing infertility and madness. Nero's scandals amplified this nightmare. His excesses drained the treasury, leading to taxes that starved provinces. In Britain, Boudicca's revolt in 60 AD was partly fueled by Roman greed. Her daughters raped, her people enslaved. Nero's response? Send legions to slaughter thousands, their heads piled as trophies. Teasing more, this is just the appetizer. Nero's fire-fiddling and golden excesses await. But first, consider the irony of his early reign. Guided by Seneca and Burrus, he started promisingly. Tax reforms, anti-corruption measures. But power corrupted absolutely, turning reforms into repression. By 62 AD, Burrus dead, poisoned, Seneca retired, later forced to suicide. Nero was unleashed. Another layer, Nero's perversions weren't just sexual, though those were legendary. He married his freedman Sporus, castrated to resemble Poppaea, parading him as empress. The wedding? Public, with dowry and veil. Absurd. In a society where masculinity meant military might, Nero played bride in mock ceremonies, deflowered by guards. The pain? For Sporus, emasculation was literal torture. No anesthesia, high infection risk. Survival meant submission, resist, and join the arena fodder. Engage. Would you attend Nero's bizarre weddings or fake illness to skip? Comment your excuse. Let's laugh at the lunacy. Delving deeper into marital scandals, Poppaea wasn't Nero's only obsession. Before her, there was Acte, a freedwoman he loved genuinely, or as genuinely as a sociopath could. Agrippina opposed it, calling Acte a slave whore, so Nero hid her in villas. When Agrippina threatened to back Britannicus, Claudius's son, as heir, Nero poisoned him at a banquet, the boy convulsing over dinner, Nero joking about epilepsy. The absurdity. Guests pretended nothing happened, toasting while the corpse cooled. Pain of survival, dining with death, where every cup could be your last. Nero's scandals intertwined with Rome's culture. He adored Greek arts, sponsoring festivals where he performed, singing, acting, racing chariots. Senators were forced to applaud, doors locked to prevent escape. One woman gave birth during a recital, too terrified to leave. Revolting? His art masked insecurity. Critics vanished. In 64 AD, he toured Greece, winning every contest. Bribed judges, rigged races. He freed Greece from taxes, but bankrupted Rome. But the big one looms. The Great Fire of 64 AD. July 18th, flames erupted in shops near the Circus Maximus, raging for 6 days, destroying 3 districts, damaging 7. Nero, at Antium, rushed back, or did he? Rumors said he watched from the Esquiline Hill, lyre in hand, singing about Troy's fall. Official story? He opened gardens for refugees, imported grain, but whispers. He started it for urban renewal, to build his golden house. The pain? Thousands homeless, bodies charred in ruins. Survival? Scavenging amid ashes, dodging looters, breathing smoke that scarred lungs. To deflect blame, Nero scapegoated Christians. New sect, easy targets. He had them crucified, burned as torches, sewn into animal skins for dogs to maul. Tacitus called it exquisite tortures. Absurdity, the enlightened emperor turning faith into fuel. Revolting, the stench of burning flesh lighting his gardens. Engage. Blame Nero for the fire, or call it accident. Comment your theory. History's still debating. As part 1 wraps, remember the nightmare. Rome under Nero was a gilded hell, where art and atrocity blurred. Teaser. Part 2 dives into the Golden House's excesses and more perversions. What's your guess for his wildest act? Comment now. Back for more of Nero's depraved circus? You thought Part 1 was wild. Matricide, murderous marriages, and torching Christians to light his parties. Buckle up, because Part 2 of the most perverted emperor's scandals cranks the madness to a new level. Rome under Nero was a fever dream of gold, blood, and bad poetry, and surviving it was like dodging daggers in a drunken orgy. Which of Nero's twisted acts has your jaw on the floor? Drop it in the comments, and let's see who guesses his most unhinged moment. Get ready for more historical absurdity, dripping with irony and the raw pain of living in ancient Rome's nightmare. Picture Rome in 64 AD, still smoldering from the great fire that gutted the city. The streets are a chaos of ash and desperation. Families dig through rubble for scraps, the air thick with the stench of charred wood and decay. Nero, our lyre-strumming emperor, sees opportunity in the ashes, a chance to rebuild Rome as his personal monument. Enter the Domus Aurea, the Golden House, a palace so extravagant it makes Versailles look like a shack. This is where we pick up, diving into scandal number 3, Nero's obscene obsession with luxury, a habit so revolting it bled the empire dry while plebs starved in the ruins. The Domus Aurea wasn't just a house, it was a feverish monument to Nero's ego. Spanning 100 acres across Rome's heart, it swallowed entire neighborhoods cleared by the fire. Convenient, right? Picture a sprawling complex with artificial lakes, vineyards, and a bronze statue of Nero himself, 120 feet tall, gleaming like a gaudy middle finger to the gods. The palace had walls coated in gold leaf, ceilings that rotated to mimic the stars, and rooms inlaid with ivory and mother of pearl. One dining hall sprayed guests with perfume from hidden pipes while petals rained from above. Imagine the maintenance bill. The cost? Millions of sesterces, funded by taxing provinces until they rebelled, and stripping temples of their treasures. The irony? Nero called it a modest home for a man of my station. Sure, if your station is delusional god-king, the pain of survival hits hard here. While Nero frolicked in his pleasure dome, Rome's poor lived in shanties, drinking water tainted with lead and sewage. Hunger was constant, grain shortages sparked riots, and Nero's handouts were more PR stunt than relief. For slaves building the Domus Aurea, it was worse. Chained in quarries, backs broken under marble slabs, many died from exhaustion or cave-ins. One worker, crushed by a falling column, was left to rot as a warning to others. Revolting? The sheer waste. Gold-plated walls while children starved. Absurd? Nero hired poets to praise his taste, while senators whispered about bankruptcy. Imagine surviving in a city where your emperor's palace costs more than your life's worth. Engage. Would you sneak into the Domus Aurea for a peek, or steer clear of Nero's gilded trap? Comment your choice. Let's see who's brave enough. But the Golden House wasn't just about luxury. It was a stage for Nero's perversions. Here's where we hit scandal number 4. His depraved parties, where debauchery wasn't just encouraged, it was mandatory. Picture the scene. Torchlit gardens, the air heavy with wine and sweat, as Nero hosts banquets that make Caligula's orgies look tame. Guests, senators, equestrians, even priests were forced to attend, locked in until dawn. Nero, often dressed as a Greek god or worse, a bride, would lead the revelry. He'd perform his poetry, lyre in hand, while actors mimed obscene scenes from myths. One night, he reenacted the rape of Persephone, casting himself as Hades and a terrified slave girl as the victim. The crowd clapped because refusal meant exile, or a blade. The revolting part? These weren't consensual parties. Senators' wives were pressured into entertaining Nero's friends, their husbands watching in silence to save their necks. Slaves and freedmen like poor Sporus from Part 1 were paraded as playthings, castrated, dressed in women's clothes, and passed around like party favors. The pain? For women in lower classes, it was a nightmare of violation, their bodies sacrificed to Nero's whims. In Rome, consent was a myth. Power dictated everything. One noblewoman, refusing Nero's advances, was exiled. Her husband, shamed, slit his wrists. The absurdity? Nero called these nights cultural events, claiming they honored Bacchus. Sure, if Bacchus was the god of trauma. Let's zoom in on a story. In 66 AD, Nero threw a bash to celebrate his Greek tour, where he'd won every musical contest. Bribed judges, naturally. The Domus Aurea's lake was filled with floating platforms, each hosting dancers, acrobats, and worse. One senator, too drunk to play along, vomited during Nero's song. Punishment? He was forced to drink a gallon of wine, then tossed into the lake to sober up. He drowned, his body left for slaves to drag away. The sarcasm drips. Nero, the artist, turning Rome into a theater of cruelty, where applause was survival and silence was death. Engage. If you were at Nero's party, would you fake enthusiasm or risk death by yawning? Drop your survival strategy in the comments. The nightmare of survival in Nero's Rome was relentless. Beyond the palace, the city was a death trap. Fires were common. Wooden tenements burned like tinder, and no fire brigade existed. Disease was rampant. Malaria and tuberculosis thrived in crowded slums. Nero's parties spread both. Guests left with more than hangovers, carrying infections to their families, and the cost of his extravagance. Taxes crushed merchants, sparking revolts in Judea and Gaul. Boudicca's rebellion, mentioned in Part 1, was fueled by Roman greed. Her people taxed into slavery, her daughters defiled. Nero's response? Slaughter and crucifixion, bodies lining roads as warnings. But let's not forget the absurdity of Nero's artistic delusions. He saw himself as Rome's greatest performer, staging public concerts where attendance was compulsory. In 64 AD, he debuted at the Theater of Pompey, singing for hours while guards ensured no one left. One senator, caught napping, was buried in hot sand up to his neck. Nero's voice? Reportedly nasal and weak, yet he demanded divine praise. The pain? For Romans, enduring his recitals was torture. Hours without food or relief, knowing a cough could mean execution. Revolting? He bribed crowds to cheer, then claimed their love was spontaneous. The irony, an emperor who craved adoration but earned it through fear. Transitioning to scandal number 5. Nero's obsession with divinity, a habit so grotesque it turned him into a living god, or a living joke. He didn't just want power, he wanted worship. By 66 AD, he declared himself a descendant of Apollo, god of music and sun. Temples were built in his honor, priests forced to sacrifice to his image. He'd appear in public wearing a radiant crown, mimicking the sun's rays while citizens were coerced into bowing. The pain? For traditional Romans, this was blasphemy. Jupiter was king, not some lyre-plucking maniac. Priests who resisted were flogged. One was fed to crocodiles imported from Egypt. The absurdity peaks here. Nero's divine act included chariot races where he drove a 10-horse team, crashing spectacularly but declaring victory. Crowds cheered, knowing dissenters were dragged away. He even minted coins with his face as Apollo, lyre and all. Revolting? The waste? Millions spent on statues while Rome's aqueducts crumbled. One story, a priestess, ordered to proclaim Nero's divinity, fainted from exhaustion during a marathon ritual. Nero's response? She was unworthy and replaced with a more compliant oracle. The sarcasm? An emperor so divine he needed armed guards to enforce his godhood. Engage. Would you bow to Nero as Apollo or spit in defiance? Comment your choice. Let's see who's got the nerve. This divinity complex tied into his parties and palace. The Domus Aurea's rotating ceiling, designed to mimic the heavens, with Nero as the cosmic center. His parties featured divine banquets where guests drank from cups shaped like his face. One night he ordered a mock Olympus with slaves dressed as gods, then had them whipped for impersonating deities. The pain of survival. For slaves, it was perform or perish. For nobles, it was flatter or fall. The nightmare, living under a man who believed he was a god but acted like a demon. Let's tell a story. In 67 AD, Nero hosted a festival in his golden house, declaring himself savior of Rome. A slave boy tasked with carrying a golden statue of Nero Apollo stumbled and dropped it. Punishment? He was burned alive in the palace gardens, his screams drowned by Nero's lyre. Guests clapped, terrified. The boy's family, if they survived, were sold to mines. The Koshmar. In Nero's Rome, a slip could cost your life, and your emperor would sing through your death. As we near the end of Part 2, let's tease Part 3. Nero's scandals escalate. His final perversions, betrayals, and the rebellion that ended him. The Golden House and Divine Act set the stage for his downfall, but not before more blood and absurdity. One last tale. A senator, caught mocking Nero's singing, was forced to perform in the arena, naked before a jeering crowd. He survived, but his dignity didn't. What's your guess for Nero's final scandal? Comment now and stay tuned for Part 3's madness. Ready for another plunge into Nero's cesspool of scandals? Part 2 left Rome smoldering with the Golden House's excess, depraved parties that made orgies look tame, and Nero's delusional claim to godhood as Apollo's heir. Surviving his reign was like tap dancing on a volcano. One misstep, and you're ash. Part 3 ramps up the madness, weaving these horrors into the final unraveling of Nero's empire. Which scandal makes your skin crawl most? Drop it in the comments, and let's see if you can predict the climax of this Roman nightmare. Buckle up for more irony, absurdity, and the brutal pain of surviving Nero's world. Picture Rome in 67 AD, a city teetering on the edge. The Domus Aurea looms like a gilded tumor, its cost bankrupting the empire while plebs scavenge in streets reeking of sewage and despair. Nero, now 30, is puffier, his eyes wilder, his lyre never far from hand. He's just returned from Greece, where he triumphed in every musical contest, thanks to bribes and threats. The city buzzes with fear, taxes are crushing, grain is scarce, and Nero's whims are law. Survival? A daily gamble. Plague festers in slums, bandits stalk alleys, and whispering against the emperor means a one-way trip to the Tiber. This is the stage for scandal number 6, Nero's betrayal of his inner circle, a habit so revolting it turned allies into corpses and loyalty into a death sentence. Nero's paranoia was a beast fed by power. By 65 AD, his early advisors, Seneca, his tutor, and Burrus, his praetorian prefect, were gone, dead, or sidelined. Seneca, once Nero's moral compass, was forced to retire after Burrus's suspicious death. Poison? Anyone? But Nero's suspicions grew like mold. Enter the Pisonian conspiracy, a 65 AD plot by senators, knights, and even praetorians to kill him and crown Gaius Calpurnius Piso. The plan? Stab Nero during a circus performance. The catch? A freedwoman betrayed them, spilling names to Nero's goons. What followed was a bloodbath. Nero didn't just punish, he obliterated. Seneca, despite shaky evidence, was ordered to commit suicide. He slashed his veins, dictating philosophy as he bled out, stoic to the end. Piso and dozens others, executed, their families exiled or enslaved. One conspirator, a poet named Lucan, was forced to recite his own verses while dying, a sick twist of Nero's literary envy. The pain? Imagine being a senator, years of loyalty erased by a whisper of disloyalty. Families were torn apart, wives sold, children orphaned. The absurdity? Nero staged a Thanksgiving festival for his survival, forcing Rome to cheer while bodies piled up. Revolting? The betrayal's scale, friends, mentors, guards, all disposable. One story, a praetorian, loyal for a decade, was implicated by a rival's lie. Nero had him buried alive, his screams muffled under dirt. The irony, Nero, who craved love, trusted no one, turning Rome into a snake pit where survival meant silence. Engage. If you were in Nero's court, would you plot against him or grovel for safety? Comment your strategy. Let's see who's cunning enough to outlast him. This betrayal fed into his earlier scandals. The Domus Aurea from Part 2 wasn't just a palace. It was a fortress against enemies real and imagined. Its golden walls hid torture chambers where traitors were questioned. Think hot irons and broken bones. Nero's parties, those depraved bacchanals, doubled as loyalty tests. Guests who didn't laugh at his jokes or applaud his songs were marked for suspicion. One noble, caught whispering during a recital, was chained to a post and flogged in front of the crowd. The sarcasm, Nero, the artist, turning betrayal into performance art, with blood as his paint. Let's dive deeper into the daily nightmare. Rome's air was a stew of smoke and rot, open sewers, burning trash, and the occasional corpse left for dogs. Food was scarce for the poor. Lead-poisoned water from aqueducts caused madness and sterility. Nero's taxes to fund his palace and Greek tours sparked revolts in far-flung provinces. In Judea, the first Jewish revolt erupted in 66 AD, fueled by Roman extortion. Nero sent Vespasian to crush it, resulting in massacres. Villages burned, thousands crucified. The pain of survival. For Jews, it was genocide. For Roman soldiers, it was marching through deserts to die for an emperor who cared more about his lyre. Transitioning to scandal number 7, Nero's grotesque obsession with public performance, a habit so absurd it turned Rome into his personal theater. He didn't just perform, he demanded worship for it. In 66 AD, he embarked on his Greek tour, competing in festivals like the Olympics. He sang for hours, raced chariots, crashing spectacularly, and acted in tragedies, often as crazed characters like Oedipus or Thyestes. The catch? He always won. Judges were bribed or terrified. One Greek city, to curry favor, awarded him 1,800 crowns. The pain? Greeks bankrupted their treasuries to appease him, while Romans back home starved. The absurdity? Nero declared Greece free from taxes, a hollow gesture that hid his plundering of their art and gold. Back in Rome, his performances were mandatory torture. In 67 AD, he staged a marathon concert in the theater of Pompey, doors barred to trap the audience. Senators fainted from heat, women miscarried from exhaustion, but guards ensured no one left. One man trying to sneak out was sewn into a bull's hide and torn apart by dogs, a lesson in appreciation. Revolting? Nero's voice was reportedly shrill, his lyrics juvenile, yet he demanded divine praise. The irony? He banned professional actors to avoid competition, claiming only he could embody art. Survival meant clapping until your hands bled or facing the arena. Engage. Would you endure Nero's 5-hour concert or risk death to escape? Comment your survival plan. Let's laugh at the madness. These performances tied into his divinity complex from Part 2. As Apollo, Nero didn't just act, he believed he was art incarnate. He ordered temples to his divine voice, with priests chanting his poems as hymns. One statue, gilded and lyre-wielding, was paraded through Rome, citizens forced to kneel. The pain? For traditionalists, it was sacrilege. Jupiter's priests muttered in private, risking execution. The absurdity? Nero's divine performances often ended in tantrums. When a Greek crowd cheered too softly, he had their leaders flogged. Revolting? The waste? Millions spent on festivals while Rome's aqueducts leaked and bridges collapsed. Let's tell a story. In 67 AD, during a Greek festival, a young actor forced to play opposite Nero flubbed a line. Nero, enraged, had him whipped on stage, then sent to the mines. The boy, 16, died of infection, his family erased from records. Nero's response? A new play about his mercy, the Cauchemar. In Nero's Rome, art was a death sentence, and survival meant playing your role perfectly, or not at all. This performance obsession bled into his betrayals. His inner circle, senators, poets, even lovers, were props in his theater. When Tigellinus, his ruthless Praetorian prefect, hinted at retiring, Nero accused him of treason, forcing him to host a party where he was humiliated, stripped, and beaten. The sarcasm? Nero, the divine artist, needed constant betrayal to feel secure. The pain? For Rome's elite, loyalty was a trap. Serve too well, and you're a threat. Falter, and you're dead. As Nero's reign spiraled, his scandals intertwined. The Golden House hosted his performances, its lake staging mock naval battles where slaves drowned for realism. His divinity justified his betrayals. Disloyalty was blasphemy. His parties, with their forced debauchery, weeded out traitors who didn't play along. The nightmare of survival. Every Roman, from slave to senator, lived under Nero's gaze, knowing a frown could mean death. One more layer. Nero's economic mismanagement. His excesses, palaces, tours, bribes, emptied the treasury. He debased the currency, mixing silver with copper, sparking inflation. Merchants went bankrupt, riots erupted in markets. In 68 AD, a baker, unable to afford grain, hanged himself in the Forum, his body left as a warning. Nero's response? A new tax on bread. The irony, an emperor who sang of Rome's glory while starving its people. Engage. Could you survive Nero's Rome as a merchant or join the riots? Comment your choice, rebel or endure. As we near the end of Part 3, let's tease Part 4. Nero's final scandal, his downfall, looms, a mix of rebellion, betrayal, and poetic irony. The empire turns on him, but not before one last grotesque act. One story, a slave girl, forced to dance in Nero's play, collapsed from exhaustion. Nero had her burned as a torch for his next show. Her screams haunted the crowd, but they clapped. What's your guess for Nero's final act? Comment now, and stay tuned for the finale's blood-soaked curtain call. Here we are, at the blood-soaked curtain call of Nero's scandal-ridden reign, where Rome's golden dream collapses into a nightmare of betrayal, rebellion, and one final, grotesque act. Parts 1 through 3 exposed his matricide, murderous marriages, gilded excess, depraved parties, divine delusions, and a paranoia that turned allies into corpses. Surviving Nero's Rome was like juggling knives in a lion's den. One slip, and you're done. Part 4 weaves it all together, delivering the final verdict on this perverted emperor. What's the sickest thing Nero did? Drop your pick in the comments, and let's see if you nailed his downfall. Get ready for the last dose of irony, absurdity, and the raw pain of ancient Rome's cauchemar. Picture Rome in 68 AD, a city choking on its own decay. The Domus Aurea glitters, but its gold can't hide the rot. Streets filled with starving plebs, sewers overflowing, and whispers of revolt in every tavern. Nero, now 30, is a bloated caricature of his youthful self, his face puffy from wine, his lyre a constant prop. He's back from Greece, clutching 1,800 rigged festival crowns, but the empire is fracturing. Taxes bleed provinces dry, the treasury's empty, and Nero's singing can't drown out the growls of rebellion. Survival? A cruel lottery. Plague sweeps through slums, bandits rule the night, and Nero's spies are everywhere, ready to drag you to the arena for a stray word. This is the stage for scandal number 8, Nero's catastrophic downfall, a habit of self-destruction so revolting it ended with his own blood and Rome's relief. Nero's final act began with his own people turning against him. The Pisonian conspiracy of 65 AD from Part 3 left him paranoid, but by 68 AD, even his loyalists were done. His economic mismanagement, debased coins, crippling taxes, sparked riots. In Gaul, Governor Gaius Julius Vindex rebelled, declaring Nero a tyrant and rallying legions. Spain's Galba, an old warhorse, joined in, backed by senators sick of Nero's antics. The Praetorian Guard, once his muscle, smelled weakness. Their prefect, Nymphidius Sabinus, bribed them to abandon Nero for Galba. The pain? Imagine being Nero, betrayed by the men you paid to protect you. The absurdity? He kept performing, singing in the Domus Aurea while Rome burned, metaphorically this time. Revolting, his refusal to face reality, clinging to his lyre as the empire crumbled. Let's zoom in. In March 68 AD, Vindex's revolt spread, with legions in Hispania and Africa swearing to Galba. Nero, panicking, tried to rally support with public recitals, because nothing says, "Save the empire," like a 5-hour ode to Apollo. The Senate, smelling blood, declared him a public enemy. Nero fled Rome, disguised as a slave, hiding in a villa outside the city. The irony, the man who played God now cowered in rags. On June 9th, 68 AD, with pursuers closing in, Nero chose suicide. Or tried. Too cowardly to slit his own throat, he begged his freedman Epaphroditus to do it. His last words? "What an artist dies in me." The sarcasm drips. An emperor who'd rather die for drama than fight for his throne. His body was burned quietly, no grand funeral for the divine Nero. Engage. Would you have joined the rebellion against Nero or stayed loyal for the perks? Comment your choice. Let's see who's got the guts to revolt. This downfall tied every scandal together. His matricide, Scandal 1, set the tone, kill your mother, and trust erodes. His murderous marriages, Scandal 2, alienated the elite, leaving Octavia's supporters plotting revenge. The Domus Aurea's excess, Scandal 3, bankrupted Rome, fueling Vindex's revolt. His depraved parties, Scandal 4, humiliated nobles, pushing them toward Galba. His divinity complex, Scandal 5, offended traditionalists, making rebellion a holy cause. His betrayals, Scandal 6, wiped out loyalists, leaving no one to defend him. His performances, Scandal 7, mocked Rome's dignity, turning senators into enemies. The cauchemar. Nero's habits built a house of cards, and 68 AD was the wind that blew it down. Let's revisit the nightmare of survival. Rome under Nero was a death trap. Fires, like the Great Fire of 64 AD, left thousands homeless, scavenging in ashes. Disease was relentless. Malaria, tuberculosis, and lead poisoning from pipes killed slowly. Nero's taxes starved provinces. In Egypt, grain riots saw mothers trampled, their children sold to pay debts. The pain? Living in a city where your emperor's palace cost more than your life. The absurdity. Nero's response to revolt was to plan a new tour, convinced his singing could win back the legions. Revolting? His final days saw him abandon Rome, leaving loyal slaves to face the mob. Many were torn apart, their bodies dumped in the Tiber. One story, a Praetorian Guard, loyal to Nero for years, refused to join Galba. Nero, fleeing, ordered him to guard the Domus Aurea. When rebels stormed it, the guard was crucified on Nero's golden statue, his screams echoing as looters stripped the palace. The irony, Loyalty to Nero meant death, while betrayal meant survival. Engage. Could you survive as a guard in Nero's final days, or switch sides to save yourself? Comment your plan, betrayal or duty. Let's tie the scandals to his legacy. Nero's matricide showed his ruthlessness, killing Agrippina to free himself, but it made him enemies. His marriages, Octavia's murder, Poppeia's death, proved he'd sacrifice anyone for power, but alienated the Julio-Claudian loyalists. The Golden House drained Rome, sparking provincial revolts. His parties humiliated the elite, breeding conspiracies. His divinity claims mocked the gods, rallying traditionalists against him. His betrayals gutted his inner circle, leaving him alone. His performances, meant to win love, made him a laughingstock. By 68 AD, Nero was a pariah, his art a symbol of failure. The final layer, Nero's impact on Rome. He left the empire fractured. Galba's brief reign led to the Year of the Four Emperors, a civil war that killed thousands. His debased currency sparked inflation, crippling merchants for decades. The Domus Aurea was abandoned, its lake drained for the Colosseum, a middle finger to Nero's legacy. Yet, some loved him. Plebs mourned his death, remembering his bread and circuses. Actors and poets, his pet projects, laid flowers at his grave. The absurdity. A monster mourned as a martyr. The pain. His chaos left Rome bleeding, its people picking up the pieces. One last tale. A slave girl, Lydia, 14, served in Nero's final banquet before his flight. Tasked with carrying wine, she spilled a drop on his robe. Nero, in a rage, had her eyes gouged out, her body left in the palace kitchens. As rebels looted Rome, her family buried her in secret, fearing Nero's ghost. The Kushmar. Even in death, his cruelty lingered. Now, the verdict. Was Nero a visionary or a monster? He was both. A twisted paradox. His early reforms, tax breaks, anti-corruption, hinted at promise, but his perversions drowned them out. He loved art, building theaters and sponsoring poets, but turned art into torture. He rebuilt Rome post-fire, but at the cost of its soul. His reign expanded Roman culture, Greek influences, public spectacles, but his excesses sparked chaos. The sarcasm, Nero dreamed of eternal fame, but got infamy. The pain, millions suffered for his ego. The absurdity, history remembers him as the fiddler who burned Rome, whether he did or not. Engage, visionary or monster? Drop your verdict on Nero in the comments, and let's debate his legacy. Let's wrap with a reflection. Nero's scandals, murder, excess, debauchery, betrayal, performance, divinity, downfall weren't just personal failings. They were symptoms of a Rome rotting from within. His habits turned power into perversion, love into death, art into agony. Surviving his reign meant navigating a world where loyalty was lethal and rebellion was suicide. The final irony? Nero's death didn't end the nightmare. Rome's civil war raged on, proving his chaos outlived him. One last engage. What's the most Nero-like thing a modern leader could do? Comment your thoughts, and let's compare today's madness to Rome's. This is the end, but Nero's shadow lingers. His story is a warning. Unchecked power breeds monsters, and empires pay the price. Thanks for diving into this twisted tale. Check the comments for shoutouts, and keep history's horrors alive.